Members of the public, I would say as a committee we understand that the matters under consideration tonight can be emotive. However, please can I ask you to be respectful for those around you in the public gallery and the committee and refrain from any booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. This is a meeting held in public. It is not a public meeting. Introducing the officers right in front of me. First of all, we've got Gemma Patterson at the far end, who's the team leader for Eastern and Central area. Then we have Alex Inglis, who's a planning officer, followed by Richard Cooper, the principal transport development planner at Surrey County Council. Then we have Rebecca Clark, our principal planning officer, followed by Elizabeth Sims, who's the head of planning here, followed by Beth Howland-Smith, Development Control Manager, and then Barry Devlin, who's our planning lawyer. So let's move on to the business at hand. Item 1 on the agenda, the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of November have been on table half an hour. Is it your wish I sign them as a true record? Thank you. Apologies for absence. Emma?
We have apologies from councillors Val Henry, Simon Inchbold, Liz Townsend and John Ward. We also have apologies from councillors David Edge and Carol Coburn. Their reasons for this will be given under declarations of interest. Oh, yes, sorry. And we have a substitute, Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Emma?
Yes, prior to the meeting, we've had interest from councillors Carol Coburn and David Else, who are not here because of this. Carol Coburn declares a non-pecuniary interest as feels that her working relationship with Mrs Voisin at King Edward School, Whitley, could call into question her ability to be scrupulously objective. With Councillor David Edge, a non-pecuniary interest as in the past he has provided professional services for one of the landowners. These services have all been in connection with the working farm, Eashing Farm. We also have an apologies from Councillor Mike Band with a non-pecuniary interest as a Waverley Borough Council representative on the Surrey Hills AOMB board. We also have interest from Councillor Peter Martin and Councillor Paul Follows, and they're going to read out their interests themselves. Thank you.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to declare for the interests of transparency, first of all, I am one of the ward councillors for the ward. Also, I have met with the applicant and associated representatives on a couple of occasions to discuss the application and also with officers. I've also been in correspondence with them during the course of this application process and received multiple letters and all of the associated. I am an elected member of Godalming Town Council for the same ward, a body that has raised objections to the application under its own authority. I am a member of a political party that has also raised objections under its own authority. I've been part of meetings with the Diocese of Guildford in relation to the campaign to save Greenoak School. The Diocese has supported this application under their own authority, and I've met with individual residents and groups of residents on at least 40 occasions to discuss the application, some of whom have supported and some of whom have objected. I believe that this has allowed me to hear both sides of the debate in a balanced way, and I believe I'm going to stay and take part in the debate and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to declare a non-pecuniary interest in this. In addition to being a Waverley Borough and Godalming Town Councillor, I am the County Councillor for the division which includes Aarons Hill. In that capacity, I have over the last year or so been involved in discussions and meetings with the Diocese of Guildford Education Department, Surrey County Council and residents regarding the future of Greenoak School. Additionally, I have been involved in discussions between Ash Hill Land Limited, the Diocese of Guildford, Surrey County Council and the Waverley Planning Department regarding the proposed education contribution from the developer to the Guildford Diocese Good Shepherd Trust regarding Greenoak School, and which now forms a part of this application. I will, however, stay because I don't believe this non-pecuniary interest will impair my judgment on the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Moving on then, questions by members of the public. Have we had any, Emma?
None received.
And further, Emma, questions from members?
None received.
Moving on to item 6, performance against government targets. Beth, I think you're going to introduce this.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Members will note the Planning Services performance on page 5 of the agenda. You'll see that we continue to perform well in terms of speed. In terms of quality, that's the number of appeals allowed by PINs. Members will be aware that since the publication of the agenda, the Folly Hill appeal decision was issued to allow the appeal. It should not come as any great surprise to you that we have exceeded the government threshold for special measures now. You'll be aware that we have been updating the committee on this critical performance level for the last year. This should serve as a warning that decisions on major applications and avoiding further major appeals is critical with the potential to impact this position. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Beth. Move on to item 7, the application for planning permission, WA 2018-1239, land between New Way and Arons Hill, Godalming. Proposal to erect 262 dwellings, use class C3, including 78 affordable dwellings, together with 131 square metre building for community use, use class D1, and associated works including informal and formal open space, internal road network, landscape enhancement and access following demolition of existing buildings at Oxford Wood Farm, number 19 and 20 Arons Hill. And to introduce the item, we have 3 officers who will be talking. Elizabeth Sims first of all, then Alex, then Rebecca. So, Elizabeth Sims.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good evening, members. I'll then, as the Chairman said, pass over to Rebecca Clark, Principal Planning Officer and the lead case officer for this scheme, to take members through the plans in more detail. And Alex Ingalls, Planning Officer and Support Case Officer for this scheme, will then talk through the update sheet. Members will note that this application has been before the Council for a considerable period of time, having been registered last July. Now, the timing has been planned in agreement with the applicants and has been appropriate to allow the detailed and thorough consideration of this important development. The application has clearly attracted a high degree of public interest, and all consultation responses and representations received have been considered and taken into account in the normal way. Importantly, members, all legal and procedural requirements have been followed, and members can be satisfied that their ability to determine the application tonight is legally sound and the application does not need to be deferred to allow for further consultation with third parties. This includes the reference that's been made by third parties to the alleged requirement for further statutory notification under the Development Management Procedure Order and the Planning Practice Guidance. Members will recall that in the autumn, a committee briefing was given by the applicants on an information gathering basis to inform members' emerging understanding of the plans and issues. Members' points raised at that briefing were taken away by the applicants in their submission and amendments made. And that, of course, is a completely normal part of procedure. We invite applicants to present their plans to members at an early stage to flush out early issues that they can address in form of amendments if they feel fit. Now, the committee site visit on Monday morning of this week has given members a full appreciation of the context of this site and its setting. The site is located to the west of Godalming, and the largest part of it is part of the Godalming settlement area. The site measures 12.2 hectares and is located to the north of Arons Hill and to the south of Halfway Lane. It currently comprises agricultural land and has 2 distinct areas. To the west is an open field and the eastern side is wooded. Now, Rebecca will take members through the detail of the proposal in a moment, but I wanted to draw members' attention to 5 key issues to support your assessment. Firstly, I want to be clear about the decision-making framework. Pursuant to Section 38, subsection 6 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, the determination of a planning application must be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So the starting point for your decision tonight, members, then must be the development plan for the borough. The development plan, as set out in the report, comprises the Waverley Local Plan 2018, Part 1, Strategic Policies and Sites, and also the saved policies of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002. The relevant material considerations to set against development plan are set out in the report. In the officer's view, the application accords with the development plan. Local Plan Part 1 has removed the main part of the site from the Greenbelt and the AGLV, i.e. the part wherein the main built development would be located. There is no site-specific constraint on this part of the site. This part of the site now forms part of the developed area of Godalming, wherein, as members are aware, the principle of residential and other built development is acceptable. In planning policy terms, the consideration should therefore be one of assessment of detail and impact, and not one of pure policy principle. Members will be aware that the Council is currently preparing Part 2 of the local plan, and the likely date for publication of the draft plan for consultation is now summer of this year. The earlier draft of this document, which was not progressed in October of last year, included the application site as a draft allocation for residential development. The draft plan can only be given very limited weight. However, given that Part 1 plan has removed the site from the Greenbelt and the AGLV, the principle of residential development remains acceptable in planning policy terms, as I have explained. The assessment must therefore be on the basis of the development plan, and other material considerations need to be weighed into the balance. The second key point, members, given the policy context I've described, I think it's important to point out that this is not a case where, as local planning authority, you need to weigh up whether the council can demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply in respect of understanding whether the tilted balance applies. Now, that's a test you're very familiar with as a committee and has come before you many times, but it doesn't apply in this case, and that is because the presumption in favour of sustainable development, the NPPF test, already applies in the developed area of Godalming. This is not a countryside site or one that is otherwise constrained in planning policy terms. However, the significance of the site in housing delivery terms is highly material to your decision. The site is expected to deliver some 165 dwellings as part of the 5-year supply from the 1st of April 2018. So if permission is refused or delayed, that delivery expectation will clearly be frustrated. And the impact of under-delivery, as members will know, is borough-wide, and particularly in relation to parts of the borough which do not benefit from greenbelt protection. So members are familiar with that challenge. This point then requires the committee to consider the strategic and borough-wide implications of the development, and not just the local ones. Fundamentally, this is Godalming's main contribution to meeting the planned growth of Local Plan Part 1 and to meeting acute local affordable housing needs in the way that strategic sites have already been delivered elsewhere, for example, in Cranley, Farnham and Alfold. Thirdly, members, the application has raised a number of key issues with legal implications. Notably, these largely relate to the Section 106 heads of terms in relation to SANG and education, and also to the heritage implications of the development. You'll be aware there have been a number of detailed representations and submissions circulated on these, and officers are mindful and aware of the considerable public interest in this important site. In accordance with normal procedure, we have fully considered all representations and addressed these for members, and in relation to the legal arguments, we have sought on your behalf and taken into account Council's opinion, and we're confident in the conclusions that we have reached as set out in our report and update sheet, and these conclusions are supported by our legal advisors. One aspect of infrastructure provision is in relation to the proposed education contribution. This is, in the officer's view, significant. Green Oak School has been threatened with closure. following detailed discussion with the County Council and the Diocese, an appropriate financial contribution has been sought and offered, compliant with the SIL regulations for Section 106, to contribute to capital works to the school, which will support the long-term sustainability of the school. The important point is the school site, in planning terms, as the closest school to the development, is clearly the most sustainable and appropriate location to offer primary education to occupants of the proposed housing. So members, in my opinion, the education contribution and its impact on the longer-term future of the school is a significant consideration for you to weigh into the planning balance. The NPPF at paragraph 94 requires you to give great weight to the need to create, expand or alter schools through planning decisions. Members have all, to my understanding, received an email from the Diocese of Guildford overtly supporting the application, taking into account the positive effect of the education contribution on the future of the school, and that email has been published on the Council's website for public access. Fourthly, a question that has been raised in respect of the timing of the current decision is in relation to the implementation of SIL on the 1st of March 2019 this year. The application was submitted in July of last year, long before SIL was adopted. Council's advice is very clear that a decision to defer this application to trigger SIL liability would not be a proper exercise of the Council's planning powers. Chairman, at this point, I would like to draw members' attention to the Officer's recommendation C on your update sheet, just because it's relevant to the point I've just made. So if members have located that, that has been added clearly since the agenda was published before Christmas. Chairman, just to be clear and to avoid any confusion with the point I've just made about SIL, this additional recommendation is simply procedural, and it seeks to cover off the highly unlikely eventuality that the issuing of any decision occurs after the 1st of March. Now, that is not likely, as the intention is that the legal agreement and decision will be issued shortly after this meeting if permission is granted. However, in the unexpected event that this does not happen and it takes longer to issue the decision following the conclusion of the legal agreement, this additional recommendation will avoid repetition and further unnecessary committee time on matters that have technically already been decided. In other words, the adjustments of payments from SIL, from Section 106, which you will have agreed, will after the 1st of March need to be transferred into the SIL regime, and that will be made by officers under this recommendation. It's a purely technical, procedural matter, and it is a requirement of the regulations. So that recommendation is just seeking your authority to defer that to the powers of the head of planning, simply because it wouldn't be a worthwhile matter bringing it back before the committee if it's after the 1st of March, because there'll be nothing new for you to actually take into account. Finally, members may be aware that the Council, as landowner, has an interest in the application site. To confirm, the correct notice has been served by the applicants on the Council as landowner, and the land relates to the creation of the main access. But it's important for me to remind members that the landowning interest is not a material consideration and should not be given weight in the assessment this evening. So, Chairman, thank you for your indulgence on these, allowing me to address these points. These are the key overarching considerations I wanted to set out for the committee. I will now pass over to Rebecca to take members through the plans and other determining issues. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Rebecca.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Elizabeth. Good evening, members. So the first few slides will put the application site into context. Before then, the presentation will go on to focus on the details of the proposed development scheme. So this first slide shows the application site in the context of the wider Godalming area. The town centre of Godalming is directly to the east of the site, and then the boundary with Guildford Borough Council is immediately to the west of the site. So the application site itself is shown edged in red on the screen. It totals an area of approximately 12.2 hectares. It's located to the north of Arons Hill, which features existing residential development, and to the south of Halfway Lane. The site itself comprises an area of agricultural land, The western section is a relatively flat, open field, and the eastern section is wooded in nature. Land levels slope towards the very east of the site. There's an existing electricity substation in the northern corner, which actually falls just outside of the red sight line. There are 3 existing residential dwellings which fall within the red sight line. These comprise numbers 19 and 21 Arons Hill, which are to the south, and then Oxford Wood Farm to the northeast. So this is just an aerial photograph of the site. The boundary with Guildford Borough is shown in black and yellow, and the surrounding character of the area can be seen more clearly on this slide. So the areas of residential development are shown to the east and the south of the site, the open fields to the north and the west, and then there are some sporadic residential dwellings development to the north. So to point out some of the key features within the surrounding area, as previously stated, Godalming Town Centre is located to the east of the site, along with the train station and the track. Eashing Lane runs to the site, south of the site off Portsmouth Road, and then the development in Arons Hill is immediately to the south of the site. Green Oak Primary School, which Elizabeth referred to, is located to the south here. Moving along, so going up Eashing Lane, this land falls within Guildford Borough. Halfway Lane then runs to the north of the site. You have Fitzpatrick's Referrals, the vets, which is located halfway along Halfway Lane to the north of the site. And within this complex, we've also got Caper and Berry, which is a catering company. Westbrook, which is a Grade 2 star listed house, and its associated gardens, which are Grade 2 listed in their own right. That's located to the northeast of the site. The house is approximately 210 metres away from the northern corner of the site. There are a number of public rights of way within close proximity to the site. This includes Bridleway 292 and 6, which is shown in blue, running along the northern and eastern site boundaries. We have footpath 577, which is this yellow one, which runs through the site. So effectively, it cuts off between the eastern and the western site sections. We've got footpath 44, again in yellow, which runs from the northern site corner along Westbrook Road. And then finally, there's footpath 5, which runs to the very east of the site. So as Elizabeth briefly mentioned, under Policy RE2 of the Local Plan 2018 Part 1, the western section of the site has been removed from both the greenbelt and the area of great landscape value. So the area in question is that shown outlined in red on the screen. The surrounding land remains within the greenbelts, and this includes the eastern section of the site. And this section is proposed to remain as open space. This will be outlined later on the block plan. However, the area of land proposed for residential development falls within the settlement area. So the next few slides will show members some photographs of the site. So this first one is taken from Arons Hill, looking towards numbers 19 and 21 Arons Hill. And these are the 2 existing dwellings within the site that would be demolished to make way for a new site access point. The next 2 photographs are both taken from Halfway Lane, which is the northern site boundary, both looking into the site. So this first one, you can see where the site access point would be located, and then the adjacent existing residential development of Arons Hill. And this next one is taken further along the northern boundary, further along Halfway Lane, again looking into the site. So this is Halfway Lane itself, which is also the bridleway, and this looks towards the very northern corner of the site. This one is taken while standing on the eastern site boundary. So this is looking over adjacent fields to the very east of the site. There is, as I mentioned, sporadic residential development, one of which the dwellings you can see there, that's West Hanger Tower. So just to put that into some context, so Westbrook House and its gardens would be essentially located to the far west beyond the photo. So the next two photographs I'm going to show you are actually taken from Westbrook. This first one is taken from within the house, looking out towards the application site. So if I just point out Fitzpatrick Vets, which is on Halfway Lane, the northern site boundary, you can just about see there to the left of the tree. And the Jekyll Thunderbox, which falls within Westbrook Gardens, is located at this point here. So the second photo I'm going to show you is actually taken from that Thunderbox area, looking out towards the application site. So again, just to point out, this building complex here, that's Fitzpatrick Vets. So that Halfway Lane would run across this boundary, and the application site would be approximately in this location here. So the scheme before members this evening relates to a full planning application, so there are no matters to be reserved for future approval. Full permission is being sought for the erection of 262 dwellings. Of these, 78 would be affordable dwellings, and this would equate to a policy compliant 30% of the total number of dwellings. As previously mentioned, and as part of the scheme, the 3 existing dwellings within the site would all be demolished, and a site access would be provided off Aaron's Hill to the south. A community building is proposed to the west of the site, adjacent to an area of open space. There would be an area for community gardens provided to the east of the site, along with a larger area of open space in the eastern section of the site. The proposed residential development would be confined to the western area of the site within the settlement area. So the residential development would primarily include 2-storey dwellings. However, there would be 5 flatted buildings, which would be 3 stories in height. These are located towards the south of the site. Each of these buildings would contain 9 units. And in addition, some of the dwellings within the Woodland Lane area, which is this area here towards the east, would appear 2-storey from the front, but 3-storey from the back, owing to the sloping land levels. The 2-storey dwellings would comprise a mixture of detached, semi-detached and terraced units. So the 78 affordable dwellings would comprise a mixture of affordable housing for rent and shared ownership, as shown on the plans in red and orange. Officers have negotiated with the applicant to secure an acceptable 10-year split and to ensure that the clusters of affordable housing within the site have been appropriately balanced with the mix of affordable housing for rent and shared ownership units in each area. The locations proposed take into account the operational requirements of registered providers and the advice of the Council's housing enabling officers. As part of the scheme, 6 of the plots within the site are being put forward as self-build plots. The location of these is shown in purple on the screen. These plots would be secured as part of a Section 106 agreement and would be subject to their own separate planning applications in respect to the housing type and design. And just to inform members, as I'm sure they'll be aware, the Council has a statutory responsibility to maintain a register of individuals and associations seeking land to construct a self or custom built house. Based on this register, the Council is required to grant permission to meet the demand. So for the first base period on the Council's register, the Council is required to grant permission for 12 self-build plots by the end of October 2019. So the provision of 6 plots proposed in this instance is considered to be a benefit in this respect. A community building measuring 131 square metres externally and 88 square metres internally is proposed as part of the scheme. Its intended use would be for Class D1, which is non-residential institutions. Such a use can include things like a clinic, health centre, creche, day nursery, community hall, place of worship or a training centre. It's the applicant's intention to engage with the community to establish a desired specific use for the building, and officers have recommended a condition, which is condition 40, to secure full details in relation to this building. As previously mentioned, there's also an area for community gardens towards the east of the site, and full details in terms of the design and management of this area would be secured as part of recommended condition 42. There are a number of areas of play proposed within the site. There's a main leap which is proposed to the west of the site in close proximity to both the community building and the area of open green space. As members will see, there are a number of laps which are dotted throughout the site, and there would be a play trail which would run along the northern boundary. It's proposed that the equipment would be timber-based and natural in appearance, and we would secure full details of each of the play schemes as part of recommended condition 43. The site falls within the 5-kilometre buffer zone of the Weldon Heaths SPA. It's the applicant's intention that the proposed residential development would be serviced by an off-site SANG, which is the subject of a separate planning application currently being considered by Guildford Borough Council. So the location of this off-site SANG is shown in green on the plan, with the application site being shown outlined in red. So the off-site SANG would, in walking distance, be approximately 1.9 kilometres from the application site. Natural England, the statutory consultee, is of the view that the off-site SANG would be acceptable and would effectively avoid the impact of increased residential disturbance to the SPA. Delivery of this off-site SANG would be secured as part of a Section 106 agreement. And the Council's advice, which has been sought by officers, is in agreement with this approach. There has been an addendum to the appropriate assessment carried out by officers. This responds to the legal obligation in the European judgment Holohan, to which a recently received ecological representation from the Godalming community has referred to. Officers can confirm that the approach to the application under the Habitats regulations is lawful and sound. The proposed scheme would feature a new access point off Arons Hill to the south of the site, using land currently occupied by the 2 residential dwellings. This would be a 5.5 metre wide arm with footway either side. The site access point has passed an independent road safety audit, and we have received swept path analysis to confirm that it can be accessed by both refuse and emergency vehicles. Turning to parking, there's a total of 585 car parking spaces provided as part of the scheme, which would accord with the Council's parking guidelines. The spaces would include a mixture of on-site garage and drive spaces, and there would be some areas of parking courts. Within those areas, features such as pergolas and soft landscaping would be utilised to help soften the appearance of the hard surfacing. There are 2 spaces being proposed as part of a car club. These would be secured as part of the Section 106 agreement if permission is granted. Future residents would essentially be given membership to the car club for a 3-year period and a drive time credit, which would encourage use of this scheme. In addition to the vehicular parking, there would also be cycle and scooter racks proposed in the community areas, so the community building and the garden area. Areas within the private amenity space and garages would be used as cycle storage for the proposed dwellings. And the flatted buildings would be provided with secure, sheltered cycle parking. Just to briefly touch on the electric vehicle charging points, the applicant proposes 75 fast charge and 133 trickle charge points throughout the site. I have seen that on page 81 of the report it states that 1 trickle charge point per 5 flats would be provided. However, this is incorrect and it should read 1 fast charge point per 5 flats. The provision would accord with the County Council's guidance in terms of the flatted buildings provision, but not for the dwellings. Officers have considered the points put across by the applicant, as well as no objection being raised by the County Highway Authority. Officers considered the provision to be acceptable. So a number of the different housing types are all set out on pages 13 to 30 of the agenda reports, and rather than repeating those this evening, the next 3 slides will essentially take members through the style of housing and materials which will be used in the main character areas. So the scheme features a central spine road, which is this orange one shown, comprising the main street, and then there will essentially be 3 character areas off this. We have the field edge to the north, the southern mews, and then the woodland lane to the east. So firstly, within the northern section of the site, this is the field edge character area, where the densities of the buildings would reduce. There would be landscaping introduced along the northern site boundary. This would create a softer edge to the landscape beyond. The area would be characterised by a mixture of semi-detached and detached dwellings, and materials would include a mixture of different colours of brickwork, grey windows and grey slate tiles for the roof. The architectural detailing of the buildings within the southern mews would be similar to that of the field edge to the north. The design of these dwellings have been put forward as being reflective of the historic terraces within Godalming. The area would be located adjacent to existing development at Arons Hill, and this area would have the highest density within the site. It would be characterised by rows of 4 to 5 terraced dwellings, and the materials would include brickwork, grey windows and red roof tiles. So the backdrop to the woodland lane dwellings to the east of the site would be that of the wooded area on the other side of the Bridleway, as well as the Valley Park in the eastern section. And these dwellings would feature different materials to the other character areas, with timber boarding as opposed to brickwork. And these dwellings would be positioned in a manner to integrate with the surrounding woodland and the landscape contours. The flatted buildings, which would be located in the southern section of the site, would effectively act as landmark buildings and act as gateways to other areas of the site, coinciding with pinch points along the main central spine road. There would be 2 different types of flats, but between them the differences are very slight in terms of balconies and fenestration. So these buildings would feature brickwork and grey roof tiles. There would be a mixture of hard surfacing within the site. The central spine road would be dark in colour, and then the secondary streets and pathways would be in lighter colours. Permeable pavement would be used for driveways and other parking areas, as well as entrances to dwellings, and the samples of materials would be secured by means of a planning condition should permission be granted. So 4 street scenes now are shown on this current slide within different areas of the site. The top street scene is taken vertically within the northern area of the site. So that's this section here, section A. We then follow on to section B, which is taken vertically within the southern area of the site, so within the mews. The third street scene is taken horizontally within the eastern section of the site, so the Woodland Lane section. And then the bottom street scene is taken along the northern boundary on the field edge area. So the next few slides will show some 3D visuals of the site. This first one is taken from within the Valley Park, so the eastern section of the site, looking towards what would be the Woodland Lane dwellings. Then this is within the eastern section, within the actual Woodland Lane area. We then turn to the field edge towards the north of the site. And then within the southern area, the mews. And then this would be located near the site entrance, with the dwellings as you come in and the open space on the left-hand side. A number of transport improvements would be secured in relation to the proposal. I'm now going to pass over to Richard Cooper, who's going to talk through these, and then I will come back and talk through the determinant issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, members. I'll just quickly run through the key off-site mitigation measures that have been secured. This is the Eashing Lane junction with the A283. The main thing to note here is that we've got, on the Eashing Lane arm, improvements to provide dedicated left and right turn lanes, so that left and right turners will not need to wait behind each other as they approach the junction. This has particularly been scoped out because there was a small pattern of accidents, 3 collisions at this junction of drivers emerging into the path of oncoming vehicles onto the A283. So this improvement will help, certainly help address that. You also notice on the A283 itself, coming southbound, we've introduced a left turn diverge lane, and this will separate left turners from traffic continuing ahead on the A283, and this will help drivers emerging from Eashing Lane to distinguish between vehicles that they will have to and give way to. So that's the scheme at that junction. Eashing Lane itself, essentially what we have here is a reduction in speed limit on the first, so this is the western section of Eashing Lane as you go from A283. Reduction of speed limit on this first straight section from national speed limit to 40 miles an hour. That has been informed by the speed surveys which we've done, which shows that speed, reducing to that speed limit is appropriate and accords with the County Council's policy on setting local speed limits. As we go further east on Eashing Lane, essentially what we're doing is, as we've done in other roads of this nature in the area, is removing some of the centre white lining and replacing with white edge markings, and introducing some sensitive, environmentally sensitive speed reducing features, 30 mile an hour roundels, repeater signs and visual narrowings. So that continues as we go down Eashing Lane. And then as we get to the other end of Eashing Lane, down towards its junction with the A3100, the main thing we've introduced here is to basically sort of formalise the existing situation in terms of how residents park on this section of Eashing Lane. Essentially what happens is we do get nothing really on the northern side of Eashing Lane. All this section here is a brick wall, and you don't really get any people parking here, but this section here between the A3100 and Oxford Drive, occasionally we do get people parking on the footway. And obviously the closer it gets to the junction does impact on the turning movements of traffic, particularly in the AM peak when it's busiest here. So the idea is that we'll provide double yellow line parking restrictions on this first stretch, and to ensure that is kept clear of parking at all times. And then we'll formalise the existing parking that occurs on street at the moment on the south side. We'll formalise that with just marked bays. It's not the intention at the moment to have any permits. There will just be formal marked bays. To inform this scheme, the developer transport consultant undertook car parking beat surveys on 2 midweek term time days, and this confirmed that several spaces remain overnight to accommodate you're only talking about maybe maximum 3 or 4 vehicles that occasionally are parking here. It should be noted that the entire scheme on Eashing Lane will be subject to further public consultation. So the developer has provided a Section 106 contribution for the Eashing Lane works, and the County Council, under its own statutory duties, would be looking to consult on these proposals, because we have to, under the traffic regulation order statutory requirements, we have to consult. So these are sort of what the County Highway Authority have developed with the applicant, but as I say, that would still be opportunity for further public consultation on that. Now we're going down to Westbrook Road. That's the junction with New Way. Here we've got the railway bridge. We've identified this as a relatively small scheme here where the cyclists coming down New Way. It's sort of maintenance issues in part, very overgrown here, but we're also introducing some signage to warn drivers to give way to cyclists. As obviously this is a key route from the development down towards the town centre. I'm now skipping to Lower Eashing and the Hollow. So here we've got Eashing Lane, the Hollow. Coming round, you've got the shuttle working signals on Eashing Bridge, and obviously A3 here. This is very much being developed. There's certainly comments from residents down here about concerns about the rat running through here. So the applicant's proposing a access-only signage on either end of Eashing, Lower Eashing in the Hollow, with some appropriate sort of speed reduction measures just to make people more aware of the historic nature of the network through there. So the main thing to note on there is that we will be introducing a traffic regulation in order to make it access only. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So, members, the matters of principal and technical opinion and the matters of judgment are displayed on the current slide. The proposed residential development would be contained to the western section of the site, which falls within the settlement area. Officers are of the opinion that the proposal would provide dwellings in a sustainable location and it would deliver 30% affordable housing, which would contribute towards the housing needs of the borough. The delivery of housing in a settlement area, given the wider constraints that apply to the borough, would comprise a significant social benefit to the development, and it would be consistent with the MPPF's focus on housing delivery. There would also be economic gains from sources including construction-based employment and the activity and spending of future occupiers of the site. The proposal is considered to function well within the surrounding area. It incorporates amenity and play space within its layout and a high quality of architectural design. All of the residential units would accord with the technical space standards, which is a significant merit. And in combination with the amenity space, officers are of a view that a good standard of accommodation would be provided on the site. The County Highway Authority is satisfied that the development could be accessed in a safe manner, and subject to highway improvements, which Richard has just referred to, the scheme could be provided without prejudice to highway safety or capacity. Subject to controls by means of planning conditions, there's no concern raised by officers in respect of flooding, contamination, air quality and trees, and subject to control by means of a Section 106 agreement and securing the SANG, officers are satisfied that it would avoid the impact of increased residential disturbance to the SPA. Whilst noting that the proposal would inevitably change the visual appearance of the site, in officers' opinion, the development would visually relate to the existing development, and overall, officers consider that the proposal would provide for an acceptable profile of homes to serve the community. There would be some loss of Grade 3A agricultural lands. However, officers consider that there is a strong case for development of the site and delivery of housing, which overrides the need to protect the land in this instance. In terms of heritage considerations, I will be shortly passing to Alex, who will refer to this matter as part of the update sheet. However, the conclusion of officers is that whilst it is acknowledged that the proposal would result in less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, which is that of Westbrook and its gardens, the identified harm is outweighed by the public benefits of the proposal. So I'll now pass to Alex, who will run members through the update sheet. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Chairman. And good evening, members. I will now take you through a brief summary of the update sheet. So regarding updates to the report, confirmation from the Clinical Commissioning Group has been provided that the financial contribution would go towards a surgery in Milford. Confirmation has also been provided by Thames Water to the applicant that there is a capacity with the existing sewerage network to accommodate 137 units. To accommodate the remaining units, Thames Water would undertake an impact study to identify what reinforcement works would be required, and such works would be undertaken at the cost of Thames Water. So there is no overriding objection raised by Thames Water in respect of foul drainage, and a condition is recommended to secure full details of the proposed foul strategy. The objection raised by the Surrey Hills Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Advisor in respect of the impact to the area of great landscape value was previously raised during the pre-submission consultation on the Local Plan Part 1. The Council fully considered this objection at the time, and it would therefore be inappropriate and unreasonable to uphold the objection to the current application on this basis. Details of the joint standing advice published by the Forestry Commission and Natural England are set out. An assessment against the relevant paragraph of the National Planning Policy Framework, as set out within this standing advice, has been undertaken by officers within the agenda report, and officers have concluded that it would accord with the National Planning Policy Framework. In relation to the development of adjacent land falling within Guildford Borough, there is no requirement for the applicant to submit a cross-boundary application or master plan for the whole site to the Council. The impact of any development within Guildford would be assessed if and when any application is forthcoming. Officers are satisfied that the current development can be delivered in isolation from any potential development of the adjacent land. At present, Guildford Borough Council are considering a separate SANG application, It is intended that the development proposed under the current application would be serviced by this off-site SANG. Delivery of the off-site SANG would be secured by means of a Section 106 agreement should permission be granted for the application before members this evening. The proposed highway improvements in respect of parking on Eashing Lane would formalise the existing situation. Double yellow lines would be imposed at the junction of Eashing Lane and Portsmouth Road, and single yellow lines would be imposed on the northern side of Eashing Lane. This would help to maintain traffic flow along the road and would apply between the junction up to Old Lodge Close. An additional built heritage briefing note has been submitted by the applicant. In officers' view, this does not provide any additional information over and above that which has already been submitted. Rather, it provides a consolidated summary of what has already been submitted and reaffirms the applicant's position that the submitted information meets the requirements of the NPPF. Whilst officers are disappointed that the applicant has not visited Westbrick House and its garden, officers nevertheless remain of the opinion set out within the agenda report that, notwithstanding the fact that a site visit has not been undertaken by the applicant, the local planning authority has sufficient information before it in order to establish the significance of the heritage assets and assess the impact of the proposed development on its significance. Officers have sought Council's advice in relation to this, and the advice is in agreement that the Council has obtained enough information itself to make a decision. With regards to amendments to the report, reference to market housing mix within the recommendation A, as set out on pages 7 and 129 of the report, is incorrect and should read affordable housing mix. With regards to responses from consultees, an additional note has been received from the County Highways Authority, which sets out responses to the objections raised by third parties, and this is appended to the update sheet. With regards to additional representations, a representation has been received from the Godalming Cycle Campaign, which makes comments in relation to the contributions being sought and cycle access improvements. As set out within the update sheet, the Guildford to Godalming Greenway scheme, which the Godalming Cycle Campaign refers to, has been identified by the County Highway Authority as one of the schemes which could benefit from the requested financial contributions for Godalming sustainable transport improvements. There have been 3 further letters from third parties raising objection to the scheme. The objections raised and the officer's response to these are set out within the update sheet. Further to carrying out a committee site visit on Monday of this week, officers have responded within the update sheet to the questions which were raised at that time. In relation to the emergency access point, this would be 3.7 metres wide, and a condition is recommended to be imposed securing details of the method of controlling the access to ensure it is solely for emergency vehicles. In relation to the existing pylons on the site, the overhead cables would be grounded and rerouted by the Scottish and Southern Energy within the proposed estate roads and landscape margins of the site. In relation to the existing substation on the site, this would remain as it falls outside of the site red line boundary. Scottish and Southern Energy have confirmed to the applicant that there will be a requirement for 2 additional substations. The full details will be secured by way of a condition recommended to be imposed on any permission granted. In relation to why an access was not proposed via the area of hardstanding off Aaron's Hill, this area of land is owned by Waverley Borough Council and is subject to a separate application, reference WA/2018/1727, seeking permission for 4 affordable houses. The current application before you this evening is to be judged on its own merits, and it would not be appropriate for members to redesign the proposed development. In relation to the concern surrounding chimneys that was originally brought up at the member briefing, a chimney strategy document was submitted setting out which units have had chimneys removed and those for which the chimneys have been reduced in size. In relation to the availability of a copy of the fly-through shown at the members' briefing for members, as it does not form part of the formal application documents, it is not included within this presentation. Officers have requested that a copy be sent to members prior to this meeting. In relation to the query surrounding the location of viewpoints for the landscape assessment, a total of 7 viewpoints have been considered, which are set out within Table 3.1 of the Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment and are listed within the update sheet. In relation to the impact on future occupiers of the noise and smells arising from the Caper and Berry premises, this would be enforced under separate environmental legislation. Regarding the CCTV recording, if this was deemed to be harmful, it is not a planning consideration and potentially a matter for Surrey Police. In relation to the distance of the Sang from the development, the walking distance is approximately 1.9 kilometres. In relation to an intended Section 278 improvements to the pathway along Eashing Lane, no improvements are proposed at this stage. However, Surrey County Highways have confirmed that improvements may be required as a future stage in the event of a forthcoming application with Guildford Borough Council. In relation to the publishing of the appropriate assessment, this is available for viewing on the Council's website. This has been amended and published following advice from Council. And officers advised that the use of a Section 106 agreement reflects a robust approach. Relating to the amendments to the conditions and informatives, pre-commencement condition wording is recommended to be added to the reasons for imposing a number of pre-commencement conditions, and the reason for imposing condition 16, as on the agenda, is set out within the update sheet. Regarding additional conditions have been recommended by officers in respect of the confirmation of necessary water network upgrades being completed or a housing and infrastructure phasing plan being agreed with Thames Water. Submission of full details of a foul water drainage scheme. Ensuring the development is carried out in a strict accordance with the recommendations put forward in the BAT Aerial Tree Assessment Report undertaken by Darwin Ecology. Submission of the full details of the emergency access point and the associated method of controlling this. And submission of full details of any electricity substations to be provided within the site. With regards to the revised recommendation, including the additional recommendation C, recommendation A, as set out within the agenda report, subject to the use of the word affordable housing mix rather than market housing mix, and it is subject to conditions 1 to 49 as set out on pages 129 to 148 of the agenda report, and additional conditions 50 to 54 as set out on the update sheet. Recommendation B is as set out on pages 153 and 154 of the agenda report. And as Elizabeth has previously set out, there is an additional recommendation C, which is a procedural matter to cover the unlikely eventuality of a decision not being reached by the 1st of March. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, officers. Before we go on to the public speaking, I just mentioned that we've got, as well as the people in the public gallery here, 112 people are in our committee rooms watching the debate. We have the webcam as normal, but we also have the Godalming community filming unit recording the event. So, and just a point that Alex made there, the fly-through video was sent to everyone on email earlier today. So now we move to public speaking, and first of all, I would ask the objector, Michael Vedden, to step forward, sir. You have 4 minutes. I'm sure the officers have said that after 3.5 minutes you'll get a beep to warn you. What?
Thank you all very much for allowing me to speak about the planning application. Not only has the consideration of this application been a depressing exercise in public administration, but errors in approach and failures to deal with many, many significant matters adequately also make it unlawful. Each of you is provided with a brief overview by email on Sunday. The history of this site has been plagued by a refusal to engage with the local community and allow the public to be constructively engaged. This started with the removal of the land from AGLV and Greenbelt under LPP1 without any proper and meaningful engagement with the local community or consideration of heritage issues in breach of statutory requirements. It continued in a sham consultation by the applicant and culminated in the failure by officers to consider adequately 245 separate objections in addition to those from 6 heritage bodies, 3 town and parish councils. Key documents have not been provided for public scrutiny or provided so late that meaningful consideration is not possible, and inadequate documents have been made available despite repeated requests for clarification. Officers have failed adequately to challenge or investigate misleading, unsubstantiated and discredited materials provided by the applicant, whilst ignoring, discounting or inadequately summarising the very large amounts of evidence-based and independent expert-supported materials provided by objectors. Everyone knows that this development is flawed and unsustainable, and people are laughing in here and in the galleries outside. We are now faced with an officer's recommendation to construct a central urban density development wholly out of character in height, density and design with local housing, all on a greenfield site surrounded on 3 sides by an area of great landscape value. But the officer's report focuses only on the border with Aarons Hill and ignores many comments on this. In the home of Gertrude Jekyll, officers place wholly inadequate weight to the preservation of the setting of one of her most renowned garden collaborations, contrary to planning law. What is the point in having protections for the settings of listed buildings if the statutory process can be ignored and the economic benefits of building next to them alone outweigh the protections? Similar cavalier disregard has been shown for the impact on Eashing Bridge and transport, safety, ecology and sustainability issues. The whole process has been disappointingly and fundamentally unfair. It has led to public disenchantment with it and its purpose. JPC members need only have regard to the fact that almost 150 people have turned up to listen to the event tonight. There is no urgency to hear this application before it is properly assessed. Even without this housing, I should emphasise, Waverley has well in excess of a 5-year housing supply. Therefore, Waverley should adopt a plan-led system and consider whether it is appropriate to allocate this site under LPP2, for which a consultation is due to start imminently. What is the purpose of consulting on LPP2 if the council decides to allocate the largest site in it just before the consultation? It will be yet another nail in the coffin of meaningful public engagement. We ask the JPC either to dismiss this application outright or, at the very least, defer consideration of it until after the LPP2 consultation, and there's been a proper and transparent assessment of this application that includes statutory consultees and interested parties. We ask all Godalming, Milford and Whitley councillors to speak up for their constituents. Thank you all very much.
I did ask at the beginning of the meeting that you do not go through the cheering, booing or any other form of disturbance. Can I call on Councillor Walden?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, you are there.
I am.
Would you care to come forward, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for the opportunity to address you this evening. I'm here to speak on behalf of the position of Godalming Town Council. We reviewed this application at a meeting of policy and management before Christmas and heard a very impassioned and compelling account from local residents about their concerns on a variety of issues. Those included heritage, wildlife, local roads, traffic, amenity and overall quality of life for residents in that part of Godalming. It is also worth bearing in mind that in my tenure in 4 years as a Godalming Town Council, I have rarely seen such strong and impassioned accounts and attendance at such meetings. It is therefore for that reason that Godalming Town Council would like to lodge our objection to this application. On the grounds, we believe it is an overdevelopment of the site, it has an inadequate housing mix, insufficient social housing provision, and moreover, there is a lack of environmental consideration to matters such as surface water control and environmental impact. The impact on local roads, traffic access and traffic generation is a particular concern of residents and is reflected in the feedback you've seen expressed in the consultation exercise. Moreover, although it is not material to the application consideration, I do think it worth reiterating that members are particularly concerned at Godalming Town Council that the consultation exercise has been woefully inadequate, and that the whole site should be considered as a complete site plan, and it is not in residents' interest, and it's completely arbitrary to consider them as two separate borough applications. I hope that members will consider our objections carefully.
Thank you very much. Call on now Philippa Leftley and Tracy Patrick.
Good evening. My name is Mrs. Leftley. I'm the head teacher of Greenoak Primary School, and I would like to briefly reiterate the perspective of the school to you regarding this proposed development this evening. As mentioned earlier, Greenoak was potentially going to be closed last year, but all elements of the school community campaigned together successfully to keep our school open. The children at the school are now thriving. We're making excellent progress, so much so that we're now the #1 school in Godalming for progress at Key Stage 2 in reading and maths, and the #2 school for writing, an exceptional achievement for our children given our recent circumstances. SAT's attainment, which are the results at the end of year 6 for our school, have risen from 0% to 64% in 2 years, and from an average 61 to 83% in 2 years in year 2, and we're achieving much success in many other areas. We have great potential as a school, but our one big problem is our size. We now only have 82 pupils, including our nursery. We need to fill our spare places in order to become sustainable financially in the future. In September, when the current year 6 leave, we will only have 72 children across the school. This housing development on Aaron's Hill will generate children for us, ensure our classrooms are full, and the school we all fought to keep open only last year can continue to be a central focus for the community, where families can be supported, the children can be provided with a continuing good state of education. The developer also, as you can see from the proposal, will be contributing to Greenoak a large sum of funding, about £864,000, with which we can improve the school's infrastructure, make various internal changes to our teaching and learning areas, all to the benefit of the children now and in the future. The stark reality of the situation for us is that without this financial contribution and the number of children generated from this development, Greenoak is not going to be a viable school. All our combined hard work and effort to keep it open will go to waste. The school will very likely have to close, something I personally really don't want to see. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'm Tracy Puttock. I'm Planning Manager at Ash Hill. This site was released from the Greenbelt in February 2018 as part of the Part 1 local plan following extensive public consultation. At this stage, we began our own consultation with stakeholders and neighbours. The adjoining land in Guildford remains in the Greenbelt, and your officers have summarised in their report that the proposed allocation is under review and holds limited weight at this time. Therefore, this application should be considered on its own merits. Should the other land come forward in the future, it will be subject to further consultation. Godalming needs new housing, of all types and tenure. This site is not affected by flood risk and is located in a sustainable location within walking distance of the station. The scheme has been designed to respect the character of the area with bespoke house types and high quality design. It provides 262 new homes while still keeping a third of the site as open amenity space available for public use. 78 affordable homes will be provided, a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bed homes with both affordable rent and shared ownership units. The majority of the open market homes will be eligible for the Help to Buy scheme, helping local first-time buyers onto the housing ladder. The overall mix of housing has been agreed by officers and caters for the local housing needs. As well as helping to secure the future of Greenoak School, the application will provide significant investment in local road and traffic infrastructure, and the County Highways officers have confirmed our proposals are acceptable. We've taken the concerns of our neighbours regarding the heritage impact extremely seriously, and whilst it's been recognised that the development would impact on heritage assets in the vicinity, this impact is deemed to be less than substantial by both officers and Historic England, and concluded that this is outweighed by the significant public benefits of the development. Indeed, leading counsel has confirmed that on all matters, the correct and appropriate procedures have been followed by the council and by ourselves, and the application is lawful. We believe that this scheme provides a high-quality, well-designed layout, providing much-needed housing, and I hope that you can agree with your office's recommendation and support our application.
Thank you both. Right, members, we now move to the debate, and first of all, Paul Follows. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everybody who spoke. I think you've made very clear the objections of a great number of members of the community, and also of Godalming Town Council and many of the other objectors. I didn't vote for the local plan in February for a very good reason, because I foresaw that we would be very quickly in the position we are now here today in that session in February. And I will just correct something that one of the speakers mentioned. The original local plan did not include this site. It was added as a major modification by the inspector, which is one of the reasons it did not have as much consultation as some of the other parts. Many people in this chamber, and many people who aren't in here now who are councillors, spoke against local plan part 1 and how it would impact their wards negatively. And all bar 2 councillors and myself voted against it. They spoke how bad it was, and yet they voted for it anyway, with the exception of Councillor Hyman here and also Councillor Denis over the other side there. We foresaw the harm to our ward, and the harm to this ward particularly is that a significant site such as this would come forward once it was taken out of the green belt. Now, 2 sites have become, 2 applications in this matter have come up before in the green belt when it was there, and were denied on that basis. So they've obviously waited to the right time to put their application in. I think really the 2 blocks that I want to look at specifically here, though, are affordable housing and also infrastructure, as well as some other basic comments. Could officers elaborate how the housing needs outlined in our local plan, and therefore the need and housing composition for sites like this, remain valid when official statistics published currently and more recently than the local plan appear to support neither the level of need or the type of need that's identified within this application? Could officers also comment on the information I have received from another department in the authority present, that there are 395 unoccupied properties in Waverley that are currently and readily identifiable for longer than 6 months? And does this number factor into the calculations of housing need at all? Could officers also comment on similar information regarding the number of second homes, which currently stand at an identified 405, and if that is A, factored into the housing need anywhere, and if they believe the housing mix outlined in the local plan may add to those numbers over time to the detriment of our community? And could you elaborate also on the absence of socially rented dwellings in the application whatsoever? My second set of questions are really about infrastructure, and I will try my best to hide my frustration here, as I have been ranting about this in full councils and joint planning applications committees for several months, foreseeing the fact that for strategic sites that came in before SIL, we would not get much infrastructure contribution, a fact that is coming into fruition almost every time we have an application coming forward. And that is because SIL was not passed concurrently with our local plan. That is why we have had many more JPC sessions than we have had in before February, and that is why we will not see a penny of this much vaunted £94 million that the authority believes we are going to get. I have asked the authority to calculate the difference in contributions between Section 106 monies and SIL. The amount that I was told for Section 106 contributions stands at £3.8 million. Under SIL, which would be in effect in approximately 5 weeks' time, this number would be £8.1 million. So this negligence of the authority, which I have been predicting in every joint planning committee session and every full council session since February, is going to cost my ward and its community £4 million in infrastructure contributions. This is fundamentally unacceptable, and we must do something about it. I genuinely think that there must be something better we can do about this, and there must be reasons to object. Looking into some other issues that I'm going to breeze very quickly, as I only have a few seconds left. The design, I still have significant issues with this design and where some of the origins are. I do enjoy looking at the applicants' designs for the site and the flyover, which, despite 585 car parking spaces, contains exactly 1 car in the actual videos themselves. And I think realistically things like the parking spaces on Eashing Lane that have been looked at, I think those will be extremely subjective depending on when you actually look and measure that number. So I very much hope that is a stringent and serious consultation if this application goes through. I have no doubt there'll be many, many more questions from other members, and if there aren't, there certainly will be from me. So I hope those will do for a start for 10. Thank you.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to take those one by one, those questions?
Thank you, Chairman. If I could start, and colleagues may be able to pick up on other questions, but the first question I wanted to answer was to give members reassurance of what it says in the report about meeting housing need. With the greatest respect to the questions that Councillor Follows has asked, that the position is very clear, and it's made clear by the fact you have an up-to-date local plan which is predicated on the NPPF, which has indicated that in looking at a scheme for market housing, you can request affordable housing based on the NPPF definition as it is at the time, with confirmed in a local plan that that percentage is 30%. It's gone through public inquiry and examination. We have an adopted plan which confirms that approach is the right one. And the process that we put in place is really quite simple, that for any proposal we negotiate with the applicants in respect to the precise tenure mix with the input from our affordable housing colleagues, and that is what has happened. And therefore, the affordable housing that will be secured from this development through the Section 106 will be policy compliant and specific in terms of meeting need, in terms of that which has been negotiated through our housing team. So I'm sorry it's not as detailed a response as the question suggests it should be, but it really is a very simple process, and it is lawful, and it's embedded in the process required by our local plan. So thank you very much. Oh, sorry, yes, I was just going to answer the point about SIL. One of the reasons in my introduction that I drew attention to the fact that the timescales with the impending implementation of SIL are to some extent frustrating. They are what they are, and this development cannot be penalised for not being SIL liable. It came in a good time last year, long before adoption. It's been negotiated over those months because it needs to be to reflect the complexity of a scheme such as this. But as far as we're concerned as officers, it is now entitled to have a determination, and it wouldn't be appropriate to hold it back to wait for SIL for the reasons that I said and that Council has confirmed. And in fact, it would be quite improper to delay this to wait for SIL, notwithstanding the frustration with the gap in funding that quite rightly has been identified. So I'd just rehearse that point, Chairman. It's just something that needs to be taken into account, but cannot be shifted in terms of the importance of it to this decision.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Housing applications and large housing applications are always unpopular, and they always create difficulty and distress for those who are most closely involved with it, and this is no exception. The first issue, as far as I'm concerned, is the principle of development and whether development is permitted on the site within the planning application. Elizabeth Sims has gone over this in some detail, and the officer's report covers this very fully, particularly in pages 53 to 58. Whether we like it or not, the whole of the geographical area, if the western section of this application, i.e. where the housing is, now falls within the settlement area of Godalming, following its removal from the Greenbelt and the area of great landscape value through the Waverley Local Plan 2018. The issue of the removal of the site for the Greenbelt was addressed by the planning inspector. We can all have our views on how good that was to be and whether that's desirable or not, but the fact of the matter is that it's happened. I am satisfied that the principle of development on this site is a given. It therefore follows, if you accept that housing will almost certainly come about on this site, if not with this application, then with another. Any rejection of this application on the grounds of it being Greenbelt or AGLV or the inadequacies of whatever would surely fail at a planning appeal were we to turn this down, as would any planning appeal fail if we turn this down because we would prefer to defer it in order to get hold of SIL, or rather than the Section 106. We have to consider the planning application that we have before us. Now, having accepted the principle of development, the big issue for me is increased traffic and traffic congestion. This development will undoubtedly generate traffic, which will feed into an already overcrowded traffic system. and in particular the A3100, variously known as the Portsmouth Road, Otford Road, Flambard Way, Bridge Street and Mead Row going further out towards Guildford. Traffic congestion has greatly increased along this road following new traffic light installations at the foot of Hollow Way and of the Brighton Road. And this has increased the pedestrian phasing at the expense of traffic flow. Improvement work needs to take place, and I'm delighted to see that on page 31 of the officer's report, the sections 278 highways contribution, I note in particular the £517,000 for the A3100 corridor improvement. This is essential. In my view, we need to have linking traffic lights along the A3100 and make necessary adjustments to ensure that there is a swifter flow of traffic. This, I believe, can be done and will, to a very large extent, negate the increased traffic. Some improvement is already happening in the next few months because I have pushed for the installation of pedestrian detectors at all of the traffic lights, which will stop pedestrians pushing the button to stop the traffic and then walking across, and then there's nobody there, but the traffic still stops. So I think that will be a significant improvement. I turn now to Greenoak School. Greenoak School is not viable as a school today, and we are all aware and we've heard of the possibility of closure. The key matter is demand for the school. Additional housing, as we've heard, will create more demand and make it viable. A contribution of £864,000 to the Good Shepherd Trust in this planning application will, I believe, have a massive impact in making the school more attractive, so that the many parents who today who are situated close to the school and who choose to send their children elsewhere will change their minds and use Greenoak School. I am just about to wrap up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And if not those parents, then future parents, I believe, will be attracted to the school, and it will be good for the school, and it will be tremendous to see it continue, survive and prosper. And just one final point, Mr. Chairman. Significant numbers of parents today in the Oxford Ridge and the Aarons Hill area send their children to schools other than Greenoak, which creates additional traffic. If the school is made more attractive, then there will be a reduction in traffic movements as a result of that. And I think that is something we should not ignore. Overall, I will listen to the debate with considerable interest, but my inclination will be to support the officer's recommendation to give approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Like Councillor Martin, I think it's an inevitability that an application like this will attract considerable interest and indeed opposition. If you'll forgive me, I'll just start off with a few basics that we are in this position because there is a national housing shortage. It's been going on for 30 or 40 years, and the last two governments are the only ones to try to do anything serious about it. And I can't think of a better example of an issue where everyone will say, yes, something must be done, but then, very understandably, perhaps be concerned if that something being done is close to them. That's completely normal, and I fully understand it. I would feel just the same myself. This led to the MPPF 2012 and the requirement for up-to-date local plans. One thing that may not be realised is how bad the consequences are, for Waverley especially, but for many others, if we have no adopted local plan. We have to look at the borough as a whole, and the borough as a whole would suffer grievously if we could not properly defend large applications wherever the developers wanted it. Inevitably, what happened at the public inquiry, when the inspector, who in effect represents the government, decided that our wish for a lower number of houses was not sound, was to enter into the classic negotiation, which is part of these things, to agree with us what increases in housing requirement would satisfy him, and we in turn had to find sites, and this is exactly why the Aarons Hill site had its designation changed. Let's not duck the issue. If we wanted to have a local plan found sound and therefore capable of being adopted and therefore to benefit the borough as a whole, then more houses were required, and this was one of the consequences. Where we are now is a case where this will provide a significant number of houses, and although they may not be the type that everyone would want, 30% affordable housing, quite an achievement these days, when viability is thrust as an argument for having no affordable houses at every possible opportunity. I too have thought long and hard about this. I know the area a little, not as well as those who are locals, and I can well understand all the concerns about traffic and two other matters. But certainly my feeling is that on the substantive issue, it would be very difficult to come to a reasonable and objective conclusion which didn't support the officer's recommendation. But I'm also very aware of the procedural issues, and I would like to pay tribute to the officers, not merely for the quality of the report, but the way they have taken advice both internally and then sought it externally to make sure the procedural side of this has been followed correctly. Perhaps one may say as an aside that any objections to the substance of an application will only be matched by the certainty among objectors that the procedure has been rubbish and the council's always got it wrong. The reason why we have such a well-paid planning bar is because there is an endless source of expensive arguments to be had between applicants and objectors, or applicants and local authorities. Here, the officers, I think, have been very professional in seeking advice to give us the best possible assurance that what they have recommended in terms of both heritage, ecology and transport will stand up to procedural challenge should it happen. So when I say again, I have every sympathy at a personal level for the feelings of those who are affected by this. I am a planning councillor and I have to look at this from a planning law perspective. And I am persuaded by the officers that their recommendation is correct, and therefore, subject to what others say, I too am minded to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. A little bit surprised how little Godalming is standing up for Godalming, but there you go. In respect of what Councillor Martin and Councillor Molyneux have just been saying, and in terms of the planning law perspective, we've had the Sweetman judgment, and what is it about the Sweetman judgment that the people in here in this chamber can't understand? You know, the question is, do we or do we not have to assess whether the SANG mitigation is effective? And the answer is yes, we do. And it hasn't been done. And why? Because it isn't effective. And that's indeed the applicants themselves have told us. They were trying to make the dumbest possible SANG with all sorts of little wiggly lines to try and fit a 2.5-kilometre walk into a tiny space with steep hills either side. And they've now gone for something which is almost as far as the SBA itself, that people have got to drive to. I mean, we did have a lovely walk on Monday. I very much appreciate the officers' guide around the site. It would have been nice if we had been able to walk to the SANG as well, but of course it's far too far, far too dangerous, and Elfin Safety would have had a heart attack. The Eashing Bridge, I mean, we're told, well, it'll take 40 tonnes. It's not a problem. Hang on a minute. If we're going to have the development next door, and yes, that is going to happen, there are going to be 1,000 extra cars altogether coming from this site. They're not going to be able to go down towards Godalming because it's going to be gridlocked. It'll be, 5 years' time, it'll be like Farnham is now in Godalming, won't it? We're going to end up with all of those cars trying to get to work by heading off down to the junction near the Esso garage on the Whitley bypass. And they won't be able to get out. It's extremely dangerous. I nearly killed myself once there. I know the route well. I come along that way to here and back, unless I'm getting chips in Milford on the way home. I always use that route. I know this Eashing road very well. It is not suitable for me or anybody else, quite frankly, to be using as a cut-through like that, and with 1,000 people. If we're not only going to have access only in Eashing, well, everybody's going to have to take that the route down Eashing Lane, aren't they? So we need a master plan for this. we need EIA for the whole of the development. That is what the law requires if we are going to, as other councillors have said, obey the law. It is within our gift tonight to refuse this because we consider it requires EIA for the whole of the development and proper master planning. And we all know that Sweetman does really apply to us. So, you know, whatever Councillor Mulliner says, the law requires, and whatever the bishop or, you know, anybody who wants to save the school is concerned, I'm sorry. We have to obey the law, and the law says that we have to refuse consent to development because there is no evidence that the SANG will be effective. There's no SANG in existence. The whole process, as far as I'm concerned, follows all of the best guidance. The idea of not putting in a Grampian condition and just leaving it to a Section 106 and deciding this before the Natural England have even been to look at the site, apparently. The whole idea that we can grant consent to this lawfully is ludicrous. I know that there's a national housing shortage, but to throw common sense and decency and the law out the window in order to put something through which presumably has been politically agreed, and you know, I'm glad that that members of the public have pointed it out because you know we have had these whipping letters in the past. People can't deny that's the way it works. Most of Waverley has protection under the habitats legislation. It limits development if there are imperative reasons of overriding public interest in granting this in order to keep the school open. That should be there is a lawful route that can be done to keep the school open and have this development, but we would need to satisfy the law with an appropriate assessment to go down that route. This chamber, 90% of it seems to be in denial, but that is the fact. I will be voting against this because, as the developer says, these off-site SANGs don't work. And they haven't provided an appropriate assessment. And I would like the information they have from them in respect of how well mitigation works. They obviously know. They've stated that off-site mitigation doesn't work as well as on-site SANGs. Where have they got that from? If they've got information on how well SANG mitigation works, we need it in front of us now. Therefore, we can't grant consent because it's not in front of us. So that's where the law stands.
I ask the officers to answer your
well,
questions.
Chairman, the question is, do we or do we not have to assess whether the SANG mitigation is effective? Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth or Barry?
Chairman, if I could start, Barry may want to add to this. Thank you, Councillor Hyman. We're very cognizant of the legal context for this application, both in terms of EIA and in terms of the habitats regulations. If I start with EIA, I think you made the point that we should be assessing this in conjunction with the site adjacent to this site. I have to say, with respect, it would actually be unlawful of this committee to start to try to assess development on the site next door where there's no application before them, it's not within their borough, and they're not the planning authority for it. If an application is to come forward at some point in the future for the land adjacent to this site in Guildford, then that development, because it's first come, first served, will need to take into account any commitments in terms of planning permissions that already exist and take into account any in-combination effect. It may well be at that point that the development is deemed to be EIA development, but this in isolation has been screened and is not EIA development, and therefore the committee can be satisfied that from that viewpoint the development proposal before you and our recommendation has been made on a lawful basis. In relation to the habitats regulations, we I think tried in some detail to go through the process we've gone through, including the addendum appropriate assessment that Alex made reference to in the update sheet. We're satisfied with the legal advice that's been given to us. We've very carefully looked at the impact, the appropriateness of the SANGS provision, the mechanism by which it will be secured, and how that relates to a decision that you would make in terms of the lawfulness. And I would just rehearse what we said before, that we've taken Council's opinion, we've looked at it very, very carefully, and that includes having regard to the most recent case law in this matter. And if you were to make a decision to grant permission subject to the 106 requirement for the SANG, in our view, that would be lawful in terms of the habitat regulations. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, members, just to confirm that this, it's an absolute prerequisite that this development will not proceed unless the SANG site in Guildford is provided. and that site has been incorporated within the appropriate assessment and has been approved as mitigating the adverse effects of this development. What I'm saying to committee is this development will not proceed without that saying. There's absolutely no shadow of a doubt there. If the developer attempted to proceed, they would be in breach, clear breach of the Section 106 agreement, and it will be open to the council to injunct the developer and to completely halt the development. So the SANG, which has been considered within the appropriate assessment process, is a viable and realistic means of mitigating the potential adverse effect. In terms of the process, the appropriate assessment and the addendum and the close reliance on the view of Natural England, it's wholly open to the council to take this approach, and following the jurisprudence on this, it's clear that it's open to the relevant competent authority, in this case ourselves as the local planning authority determining this matter, to place considerable weight on the opinion of Natural England as the expert national agency with the responsibility for the oversight of nature conservation. And I think the addendum report does explain that they base their assessment by reference to data that's provided and oversight provided to them by the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, which is a public body set up under legislation and referred to in the addendum document. So I make those remarks, Mr. Chairman, in support of what Elizabeth has had to say to you.
Thank you, Barry. Councillor Hyman, do you want to come back at this point, so before the others?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, in respect of the environmental impact assessment, this does exceed, and the Council admits, and has been through this screening opinion stage. It was 18007, wasn't it, the screening opinion? And I have been through that, and the Council could quite lawfully, officers could quite lawfully, I agree, decide that this is not EIA development. However, it is for us as a chamber, as the deciding members, to determine whether it's EIA development or not. It's firmly established in the courts, and I'm sure our lawyer will confirm that I'm correct, that we can change that if we want, and we can quite lawfully determine that this is EIA development. It does exceed the thresholds, as we all know. So, but, you know, if our lawyer would please confirm that even though the officer's decision was not unlawful, because it is up to this council to decide if for Schedule 2 developments whether there would be a significant impact requiring EIA, we can still determine it ourselves if we think that this should be master planned properly, and in fact that the in combination impacts with other developments, including the one that's going to happen next door, whether the plans are in or not, whether these should be considered properly, and I feel they should, and I would hope that members would agree. But as far as the SBA issues, of course, saying to me that Natural England are the people who know and we have to listen to them, well, our officer report tells us that as far as Grampian conditions are concerned, you have taken council advice which says Natural England are wrong. So I don't think you can be telling us Natural England are right. Sweetsman tells us Natural England and the approach taken by all of the authorities, including our officers as well, has been wrong for the past 10 years. And, you know, the question I asked, and I would like an answer. We had a 5-minute answer that didn't answer the question, of course, but will you please answer the question, do we or do we not have to assess whether the SANG mitigation is effective? That's, do we or do we not have to assess, before we grant consent, whether the SANG mitigation is effective? And the answer to that, of course, is not going to happen, is it?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, in response to Councillor Hyman's question, it's clear that the mitigation is the Guildford SANG, and that was part of the appropriate assessment and has been approved as mitigation by Natural England, whose view we are entitled to rely on. The development will not proceed unless that SANG is provided. Therefore, that is the position, and I think Councillor Hyman's question has been fully answered. I understand in terms of the environmental impact assessment, the report explains that the development was screened out by the authority as not being EIA development. It is a determination arrived at by the authority, and we cannot go back on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst I, like Councillor Mullen, I sympathise. We live in a lovely rural area, but we have to build houses and they have to go somewhere. I live in a little village in this authority. We have to put 100 houses. The whole of my village has been removed from the green belt in the local plan part 1, and we're going to have to build 100 houses in this tiny village on what was green belt. None of us want it, but I'm sure the people who will move in will love it. And that's the consequence of having to build houses. I think you should only ask Cranley, who've had hundreds of houses built on rural land, farmland, down narrow lanes, single tracks, flooding, I think everything, and most of them have been done on appeals. Yeah. So I would suggest, even if the councillors here were minded to refuse this, on what grounds I wouldn't know, because policy-wise it is acceptable, and I will be following the officer's report. My question was going to be, and I'd asked my fellow colleague, that if this application was approved but the SANG was refused, it does fall. And that's the I think, as the government would say, it's a backstop. But it's guaranteed, we know it. Therefore, if there's no SANG, there's no Arons Hill. But I do really sympathise. And traffic-wise, we had a presentation by a highways colleague once, and he said that traffic will build up always because the traffic on the A3 going into London, and I drive it 3 times a week. I leave at 6:30 to avoid it. There'd be no more building in London. That's not acceptable. They will be building in London. The traffic will just increase, and that's the nature of it. And I'm really sorry, but there've got to be places in Godalming. It's one of the bigger towns. It's got all the shops. I use your Sainsbury's, and I drive in, and I drive down Brighton, and the traffic lights are rubbish at the bottom there, but they are improving. So I am sorry, but I will be supporting the officers.
Thank you, Chairman. I almost feel vindicated this evening for being ridiculed for having spent so much time doing public speaking or speaking as a councillor, representing my ward in 2014, 15 and so forth and so forth. I get so frustrated because my fellow members, did we learn nothing from the previous applications that were before you? Lessons were there, they should have been learnt from. You're trying to rewrite history and it's too late. I supported a local plan for very good reason, and I supported that plan because I wanted protection for the borough, because Cranley faced what you're facing. But what happened in Cranley, and I'm going to take advantage of this moment to reiterate the point because I think it's worth it. Cranley got 1,500 houses allocated to them. We were robbed of our green fields because we had no protection from the green belt. We didn't have a local plan to protect us. There was no sill then. So we got over 1,500 homes on our beautiful green fields. We've got no railway station. We've got one road in and one road out. Each of those roads is over a one-way bridge. We didn't even get mitigation against highways for improvement to match the exact funding to make sure the infrastructure was going to work. I don't believe that on refusal, because you're quite right, we fought hard and we fought long, and we got to a position where we took many of these applications, large strategic sites. We filled our village hall with not 120, over 700 people who came to talk about what was happening to Cranley, but they still got passed on appeal by inspectors. The same inspectors who've allowed for the release of the green belt in your area to be used for housing. I support the officer's recommendation, and I support it for very good reason, because I don't believe on appeal we could defend this decision. I also think it's a threat to the 5-year housing supply. And it's also ignoring what many of us fought hard for, which was protection for our areas, for our local plan Part 1. That was an adopted policy. I believe it will put threats to other areas of the borough, because we're here, yes, we can be parochial, and yes, we can represent our wards, because planning, there's planning law, planning policy, and there's democracy. Now, I'm fighting hard this evening on all 3 levels of that, because a 5-year housing supply we have, any threat to that puts more housing in areas that remain unsustainable. And the 2 most unsustainable areas in this borough is the East, Cranley and Farnham. So where do you think these houses are going to go? So I'm going to support the officer's recommendation because I believe in the strategic approach. I believe in the local plan. I believe in a 5-year housing supply. And I believe in protecting the borough as a whole. And I, for one, am not ashamed to say Cranley's got its lot. We don't want any more. It's time to be fair. It's time to put it in sustainable locations. And it's time that we woke up and learnt the lessons, stop reinventing the wheel. You've got a local plan Part 1. Embrace it, use it, and make it work for you, because you're in the position you're in tonight because we didn't have a local plan Part 1 then. Thank you for your indulgence, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know the area well, having lived in Godalming for over half my life, and know this particular area well because years ago I was chairman of governors of Green Oak School. I'm no longer associated with the school, so haven't had to declare an interest, but I know the road network around it. I don't intend to repeat what Councillor Martin and Councillor Mulliner have said, but there was nothing that they said with which I disagreed. Clearly, as a matter of principle, there's going to be housing on this site due to what has happened so far, and we have been reassured that all procedural matters have been complied with. I would like to compliment the officers not only in their report, but going the extra mile to get outside legal advice on all the matters which I have to say I was slightly uncomfortable about until reassured that barristers' advice had been obtained and that advice had made it clear we were doing things correctly, despite what Councillor Hyman may feel. There are frustrations.
Point of personal explanation, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman.
I follow the legal rulings and have been stating those, and we appear to be being told here by Councillor Goodrich that council opinion on questions, in respect to questions, we don't even know what questions were asked. Is Councillor Goodrich right to say that, to hold that council opinions that this authority has taken overrides the decisions and rulings of the Grand Chamber? Because I don't think they do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor
Chairman,
Goodrich.
as has been explained by our legal officer here and also by Elizabeth Sims, the advice has been obtained by members of the bar, barristers. I call them barristers rather than counsel, so we know we don't confuse counsel in 2 different spellings. But the barristers concerned have given advice, and that advice has been based upon the law as it is now, including all the recent cases and everything else, as one would imagine. And therefore, I am afraid, despite the fact that I am a retired lawyer, I do accept the advice that lawyers give. And I have some qualifications, therefore, in the law. perhaps a little more than Councillor Hyman, but he, I'm sure, is well read up on the matter. But at the end of the day, we've sought legal advice, and that legal advice has been given and relayed to us. When one has a difficult application like this, there are technical issues and matters of judgment. Technical issues I accept entirely, although I have to say, as a person who lived in Godalming and goes through Godalming most days still, that I am surprised that the Highway Authority feel that the junction with Eashing Lane and the B3100 will be okay. My gut feeling is that it won't. But because of the technical reports, and in particular in the additional papers, the letter from the Surrey County Council of the 7th of January 2019, they are the experts, I am not, and one has to accept the expert advice we're given. On the matters of judgment, I have carefully considered those, because these are the matters where we have discretion, and I have to say I think the arguments put forward by the officers in their report were well made, and I agree with them. And therefore, subject to anything else that may be said today, I'm minded to go along with the officers' recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just first off, a couple of questions. Firstly, can the question about social rent and its absence from the application that I asked at the beginning be answered, because it is missing? I also just want to say the council supported a local plan way after the horse had bolted, and I completely sympathise with Councillor Forrest-Yesby, because clearly Cranley was one of the areas that took most of that housing during the time that horse was bolting. And you mentioned that things were not getting SIL. Well, they're not getting SIL now either. So if you can tell me what benefit our local plan is having to Godalming at present, considering that SIL was not passed at the same time, I would debate that its benefit is actually being shown in Godalming. It's a strategic site. Surely strategic sites should have had SIL. Sorry, that's a difficult sentence. I'm also surprised at the Highway Authority too. I share Councillor Goodridge's concern there. There was a reason, after all the planning officers and the JPC members went up to the site after 10 o'clock, because we probably wouldn't have got there on time had we done it any earlier. Is it in a sustainable location? I don't know if that's really the case either, considering the amount of traffic and the gridlocking that will occur. I also just want to quickly say about Green Oak, I was also involved in supporting that school staying open. I think it's the only viable school really for the area itself. I completely am amazed at the level of improvement that's gone on. I think that's fantastic, but it also shows that the school is actually viable in its own right. What I'm saying here, and my objections are principally that the applicant should be giving them that money. That's their obligation anyway under the current rules. What I'm actually concerned at is the community is losing £4 million of extra money that it should be getting to mitigate the harm this application is actually causing. The harm which the local plan foresees, with SIL being written into it as a concept, and the harm that is not being mitigated because SIL is not applying here. So I have some issues with that. I have a little bit of if officers could guide me through this question, because I just need to understand it a bit better. Sang, particularly here. Now, normally, I would agree that the mitigation would be fairly difficult to have a conversation about, because if it's right next to the site, people can use it. It mitigates what it's actually, the harm that's being caused. Now, this Sang is obviously quite a long way away. Can the Surrey Highways officer present in a second comment as to the road safety aspects of the walk between that Sang, for one? And secondly, I just want to refer to some evidence of the council's own health and well-being, and also some evidence actually that I viewed when I was taking part in meetings at the diocese, which went into some really interesting demographic analysis of the ward, which I think possibly is relevant in this particular Sang because of its walking distance. Now, that health and well-being analysis and other analysis noted that Erin's Hill and Oxford Ridge had two particular factors of note here. One is that it had the lowest car ownership in Godalming, and one is that it had the highest instances of disabilities impacting people's ability to walk. So actually, does this Sang actually mitigate the issues for local people when it's that far away, if less people have cars and less people can walk to it? So if that appropriate assessment deals with those concepts, is that actually Is it actually addressing those things when it considers it appropriate or not? I don't think it does. I would also like to add, is it appropriate that we only received this information on January 7th in its final form and are reviewing it now? Was that acceptable time for us to be reviewing this? So if officers could comment on my original questions, and also about how SANG works in this case, and whether we believe actually it mitigates the issues in question, and particularly about the road safety aspects of actually getting to this SANG at all. Thank you.
Richard or Elizabeth first?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll cover off the first point about road safety. The route to the SANG from the site, you have to go along a sort of about 300-metre stretch of Eashing Lane, then you go off onto the public footpath network. That takes you down to...
Sorry, Chairman, can I ask if the plan is put up that's in our update sheet? So in the update sheet, there is a plan showing both the SANG. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
And then, so you go down that stretch of Eashing Lane. In terms of harm, the government says that we have to look, in terms of highway safety, at personal injury accident records. That is accidents that are slight, severe, or result in a fatality. Obviously, as I've set out in my response to the application and the response to representations, that analysis has been done for the whole stretch of Eashing Lane. But in particular context of the route to the SANG, there has been no records of any personal injury accidents over the last 5 years, which is the period of time that we're meant to assess. But I think it noticed, obviously, there will be an increase in people walking along that stretch, and we've looked to mitigate that by putting in the improvements that I went through at the beginning. We do also have a short stretch of Lower Eashing, the hollow, which you have to walk within, which is until you then get onto the footpath to the south of the hollow. So I'm satisfied that there's no existing pattern of accidents on those stretches of Eashing Lane that would be exacerbated as a result of the development, and indeed feel that the measures that I've outlined mitigate it to an acceptable degree.
Elizabeth, did you want to come back at all? Rebecca.
Thank you, Chairman. If I just briefly touch upon the social rent side of things. So I think there's a degree of flexibility in the recommendation being put forward to members tonight by officers. Recommendation would essentially secure the provision of 30% affordable housing along with the affordable housing 10-year mix. So essentially that would allow for social rent units to be provided as part of the Section 106 agreement if it was considered appropriate to do so. So obviously we would consult with our council's housing enabling officers in the drafting of any Section 106 agreements, and if they, you know, after speaking with registered providers, if they felt that that was an appropriate means to have on-site social rents units, then we could appropriately secure that. Thank you, Chairman.
May I just ask quickly on that one? Could Rebecca, could you just give an indicative cost of an affordable dwelling on this site?
No, Chairman, I'm sorry, we can't. But what I can say, Councillor Follows, is just to give you some comfort. Your point, you were helpful, you flagged up you were going to ask that, and I had a conversation to support that, that discussion with Andrew Smith, Head of Housing, and he does acknowledge social rent may well be an important component of that affordable housing mix. But as Rebecca said, the recommendation as phrased does accommodate that flexibility. So if that is the appropriate mix, it will be taken into account when the legal agreement is actually signed. So I think you could be happy that your point will be accommodated in that.
May I ask one very small supplemental question on that? Is the need that will be used to assess that 106 the current or the current ONS figures, the 2016 ones that the government have adopted for housing need, or the 2014 ones that the local plan is based on?
Are you talking about housing projections or the housing requirements?
So my understanding, so if you're talking about a Section 106 agreement here that is trying to figure out what type of mix it is here, and if social rent is if that is to be determined based upon some kind of criteria between you and the housing needs people, yeah? Now, are you using the ONS figures that the local plan was based on, the 2014 ones, or the currently accepted government figures, the 2016 ones? Because actually, I think that's a material difference that would change that distribution, potentially. I'm just curious at this point.
If I understand it, Chairman, if I may respond, there's two different things going on here. There's the housing requirement overall borough-wide, which is predicated on the population projections, for which there's a current debate. Guildford are arguing for more recent projections. Our plan is based on the 2014 projections. Our local plan is the starting point, as I said at the beginning, and the housing requirement for Waverley is currently based on those population projections that we use for the local plan. In terms of the negotiation in respect of the appropriate housing mix and tenure for purposes of the legal agreement and the debate that we'll have, the discussion we'll have with our housing colleagues, that will be around understanding the precise tenure split and mix which reflects borough-wide housing need in terms of housing requirement for social housing. So it's informed by the SHMA, which is still the same document which has informed the local plan, but it's that document which will inform the appropriate split of housing. Does that help answer your question?
So, effectively, it refers back to the SMA in the local plan, which is from the currently outdated data. Yes?
Well, it's the current basis of understanding the tenure and housing mix for the borough that the housing team work upon. But for local plan purposes and for planning decision-making purposes, it's up to date.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Apologies, the question on the SANG and its analysis based on actual demographics of the area that it's actually supposed to be mitigating the harm for, please, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. The SANG is seen to be an appropriate form of avoidance for the likely significant effect. As confirmed by Natural England, we've contained it within the avoidance, the appropriate assessment, and Natural England have confirmed that our approach is sound and they're in agreement with it, and therefore, as I said earlier, we're satisfied that means we're meeting the terms of the habitat regulations for purposes of this application.
Are Natural England a competent body to assess the demographic needs of the ward and apply those to such a mitigation?
Well, Chairman,
yes,
the planning authority is the competent
authority. We must stop this ping-pong, please. Councillor Follows, but Elizabeth, would you like to answer?
Unless the committee wants more on this, I think they're very familiar with the concept of the fact that they constitute the competent authority for purposes of making decisions, and I hope they take into account the advice from officers, which is obviously reflecting that of Natural England. So unless the committee wants more on that, I'm not sure there's very much more to be said. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I could add to the fact that, assist here possibly, the appropriate assessment refers to the documentation provided by the applicant. One of those is the same management plan. This is an exhaustive document. Contents, for example, address legislative planning policy background. It goes into European case law, including sweepment, designated site locations, conservation status of SPA baseline assessment, detailed proposals for saying management plan, management schedule, and it goes on in this way. And then various plans and appendices. Oxford, there's an illustrative master plan, Appendix 2, Wealdon Heath Spa, SAC Natura 2000 standard data form, Appendix 3, European site conservation objectives for Wealdon Heath Spa and SAC, Appendix 4, Thursley, Hankley and French and Commons treble SI citation and summary unit condition. I think that would be from the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, which is a statutory body. Appendix 5, site citation for Wealdon Heath Spa. Did I repeat myself? Appendix 6, Thursley and Ockley Bogs Ramsar information sheet. Appendix 7, European Site Conservation Supplementary Guidance. Appendix 8, Guidance for the Creation of Suitable Accessible Green Space Natural England. Together with this very weighty document, I don't have the appendices. So there's been a very, very thorough assessment of this same proposal, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman, you wish to come back on this point?
No, Chairman, the question was asked whether people want to continue to discuss this and this issue, and I would like a straight and very simple yes or no question answer to the question of do or do we not by law have to assess whether sang mitigation is effective, because I've read all the documents that our officers are referring to here, and in three places the information informing habitats regulation assessment, a 300-odd page document that was put up in June or July, wasn't it? June 30th, I think. That document in three places states that we have to consider the bird population numbers, but the applicant hasn't put a bird count or any bird population numbers in there, so it's not an appropriate assessment, so we can't grant consent lawfully this evening. And there certainly is no information in respect of whether sang mitigation generally, or anywhere in particular, is effective, even though the developer claims that they know that the off-site sangs aren't very effective, and we need to know more about that before we can make that decision. So I would just like an answer to that question, Chairman.
Thank you.
Do we or do we not have to assess whether the sang mitigation is effective before we grant consent? Thank you.
Thank you.
But back to what I originally said, Mr. Chairman, the available evidence put to Natural England, who are the statutory competent authority upon whose views we can rely, and there is case law, are satisfied with the same proposal, and we can rest on their view.
Thank you very much. Councillor Adams.
Sweetman says we can't do that, Chairman. I've got an answer. Do we have to assess whether it's effective? Not do we have to listen to Natural England, who have been told they're wrong?
Councillor Hyman, you've had your answer from a planning lawyer. We must accept that.
But, Chairman, the law does say that we must consider habitats compliance. That's Regulation 9(5), I think it is, of the 2017 regulations. We must consider this compliance, and the question has to be answered. And if I can't get a yes or no answer, I think all members here must realise what that means. The bird numbers aren't there because there is an extreme risk, because the bird numbers are horrendously low compared to how they'd reached 15 years ago. We should the decision has been made by Sweetman for us, and our lawyers and ex-lawyers in this chamber should pay attention to that, and they know damn well that they should not be supporting what is quite frankly an attempt to completely ignore the constraints that protect our borough. We've been putting up with this for 10 years. I've been proven right all along, and they still have no humility whatsoever. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, you've made your point. You've had. I will move on to Councillor Adams. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I realise that most of the matters that have been discussed today are the weighty ones about the whole site and everything else. But I would, as this is a full application which includes the design and structure of the homes themselves, I'd like to make some comments on that. I think that the houses haven't seemed to have changed very much from when we had the briefing, and there were some significant comments about that. Some of these are really quite reasonable. The larger ones where there's more than one building together, they look quite good. But some of the others, the smaller ones, are just boxes, and they look awful, to be honest. And I'm disappointed that the developer has not actually made more of an effort to actually produce some attractive designs. And secondly, I'd like to raise the issue which was mentioned briefly about chimneys, that some of them have been removed and some of them have been reduced. That wasn't the point. And I thought we'd made it abundantly clear to the developer that these square chimneys looked industrial and ugly. And we were looking for them to come forward with something that was rather more art and craft and a bit more attractive in design. So I'm very disappointed that, you know, we've got to make this decision tonight, but we seem to be having to make it on the basis of these really box-like houses and ugly chimneys. I would like to see a condition added which said that further work needs to be done on the design of the houses, so certainly the smaller ones, and the design of the chimneys. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I turn to Rebecca or Elizabeth at this point?
Thank you, Chairman. I would just add that Councillor Adams is absolutely right that there was an interesting discussion at the members' briefing with good feedback on design aspects. We have continued that discussion with the applicants to rehearse members' concerns, and we have seen some of the changes they've taken on board, and you'll see from the report we were satisfied that they seem to have acknowledged the key concerns. As Rebecca made reference to, they submitted a chimney strategy to demonstrate how they had changed the chimneys. The impact of the chimneys, the biggest ones, is obviously far less, and they have removed some of them. The style is, I think, deliberately modern. I don't think they ever intended them to be Luchin-esque, but they were a modern interpretation of the fact that a chimney is, particularly in this area, is very much a feature of buildings. Our design officers looked very carefully at it. She actually quite likes them. She was quite disappointed that they changed, but our response was that it was balancing her professional view with the aspiration of the committee. In the end, you're the decision makers and you'd ask for there to be that change. So I think we've come to a reasonable compromise in terms of what the applicants wanted to do, what the design officer's input was, and what your aspirations were. I think it would be very difficult to incorporate a condition on a full application to say, notwithstanding one element of the design, there needs to be a change. I'm not sure how enforceable that would be. And so I probably would recommend that that probably isn't the solution to it. I think overall you'll have to make a judgment as to whether or not you're satisfied in the round the design strategy is right. And for all the reasons I've given and for all the reasons the applicants put forward, we felt that they had made sufficient attempts to modify the design and incorporate the diversity of design, which members are also very keen on, to have these different character areas and to have modern, relatively modern design in a vernacular context, and we felt they'd actually achieved that. So that's probably not answering your question entirely, but I hope it's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Coming into this meeting this evening and having gone through the formidable report, an excellent report, and also the submissions made from our constituents, also excellently produced, I had a strong measure of confusion. However, what I've heard tonight has been very interesting to me and helped to set quite a number of important points in context. So I feel a little more at ease with probably supporting the officers. I would, however, make some points. I did feel that when I came in tonight that, excuse me, I had very much benefited from a view of the Ash Hill presentations. Some of the items have been shown tonight, but being available to us sometimes in 3D and certainly on an A3 format and in colour really helped a proper understanding. And I personally would say that if we took the development that we see before us completely out of Arons Hill, the environment, so we just saw it within the boundaries described, I feel that is a well-presented development. And those 3D views, the walkthroughs, the different areas that have been identified, clearly much professional knowledge and expertise has been applied there. Now, in terms of aspects of good design, I'm very loath to be for or against what I see as the buildings there, because those for me are about aesthetics, and what I prefer isn't necessarily what fellow councillors will prefer, and especially Councillor Adams. But there are other aspects about good design, and one of them appears to be a full adoption of the National Technical Space Standards in terms of the minimum floor area, because if rooms are, if buildings are designed like that, then we've got a firm and well-defined point from which we say something is unacceptable or something acceptable. However, there's two aspects to the technical space standards, and the other, which hasn't been addressed in the report, is the actual dimensions of bedrooms. And I personally would like to have seen, and certainly going forward for any other applications, whether the bedrooms in each of the designs do meet those minimum standards, because that's about good living space. And we haven't got that particular information here. And if we had, we might be able to say, yes, all the 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms in each of the house types meets those minimum standards, therefore that represents a minimum of good design. Some of them may not, though. And for me, that would move the number of bedrooms down to 1 or 2 less, because for me, they will be box rooms and not suitable for human living and giving those people a reasonable start in life. Now, the other aspect is, and those who've heard me before, it's about allocated parking spaces, and just taking an average, then we end up with 2.2 spaces per dwelling. In this modern day and age, even over the last 5 years, I think I do not feel that that sort of allocation is realistic anymore. And we also have a figure in here where 20 dwellings, each of the 20 dwellings, are allocated 1 visitor space. I don't believe that's a sensible, practical approach to dealing with visitors. Those are the particular points I just wanted to make and observe. I'm just glad there was enough time left for me to speak. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman. The point I wish to make has been covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Follows does seem to luxuriate in his role as an opposition councillor. And, of course, he's entitled to do that, although I would remind him that the planning process here is quasi-judicial. I just want to make 3 observations. Firstly, he talks about SIL and seems to imply that we should be deferring the application in order that we can later take advantage of SIL with a future application. I think were we to do such a thing, we would be subject to appeal and we would lose on appeal. Secondly, he fairly boldly stated that the school, as it is now, is viable, or looks to be viable. Well, I have considerable experience with the school over the last 14 years that I've been the county councillor for this area. I was instrumental 12 years ago, 10 years ago, in keeping the school open when it became, when it changed from being St Mark's School to being Green Oak School. It has had a checkered existence. It is not viable as it stands. A capital injection of £864,000 and additional housing, both here and in extra housing being provided by Waverley Borough Council, will, in my view, make the school viable. But I do not believe that the school is viable as is. And the last point I'd just like to make is that regarding Sang, now we've got all sorts of thoughts about Sang, and I understand all those, but one of the thoughts was it's too far away for people to walk, and it's a difficult walk. I would point out, if we look at the photograph of the overhead photograph of the area here, we all know that Surrey is the most wooded county in England. Well, not that one, no, the photograph of the whole of the area. We see, oh, it's going to take a long time to get to it, sorry. There we are. There we are. All I'd say is that we can see considerable land to the south and to the east, which is wooded. We know that the eastern area of this site of the 12.2 hectares is going to be enhanced and is green land and so on and so forth, partly wooded. So residents have a considerable opportunity to enjoy wooded and land facilities. And of course, in addition to the Sang, just beyond the Sang, across the other side of the A3, there are hundreds of square miles of common land, heathland, and so on and so forth. So we are very well catered for. Well, yes, but the point that I'm making is that we have very well catered for in terms of recreational amenity for people. And that was the point they were making. It's too far to go to the Sang. I don't accept that. Those are the points I'd like to make, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like others, I've listened to this debate, and I mean, I have to express my empathy with all of the objectors. Like Councillor Forresky said, some of us have been in this position with applications in one's ward where there's been a great deal of concern over the effects. I think it would, in my view, be wrong to suggest that we can defer or to reject this application without a grave risk of it being overturned at appeal. I note the points that was made on SIL, but I think they're not relevant to planning. The point I heard that was being made is that we shouldn't be here where we are today. Well, I think that's a separate debate. We certainly shouldn't be considering anyway trying to delay this application to get SIL. It's very useful to know that in future we'll get £4 million more under the SIL regime than under the previous one. There has to be a cut-off. This one has missed it. Taking Councillor Adams' point, yes, I did want to mention some words on the detail here. The parking, I think the parking is reasonable, but you get to the point where you look at the 5-bedroomed houses, and it's 5-bedroomed houses for 9 people and 2.5 or 3 car parks. I mean, I think that things have moved on. I think the number of visitor spaces here is low, and I think they're going to appear to be low, especially in the terraces area where there won't be the opportunity to actually park in front of houses, etc. It's good to see electric car charging. I note that we've been told that the 2 substations have to be added in here for this development. Well, it's a great shame that if they've got to be added, that we don't increase the amount of fast charge points that we're putting on this estate. I think there is a big opportunity to think forward to the future. I was going to mention something as space per dwelling, but it's nice to see it meets it. But I take the comments that have been made about bedroom sizes. It's nice also to see that the affordable home has been spread around. I do think the flats are a bit institutionalised if I look at them. Certainly that's the way it came across to me. I would hope that with a bit more detailing they can make them less like, I think, modern prison blocks. They look mill-like. They really do give me a bit of concern into how they will actually blend in with this community. I think we have before put an informative in asking for more cooperation, more consultation with local communities. And certainly listening to objectors early on, there was grave concerns that they hadn't been consulted. I think there are aspects of this development and there's lots of conditions to be discharged, and I think it would be very good if we could encourage a greater degree of cooperation with the local community. Thank you for letting me make those points, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Elizabeth, you want to comment at this point?
Thank you, Chairman. It's only just to remind members, on page 80 of your report, where we do address parking space requirements, that the scheme is fully in compliance with your guidelines. And your guidelines, as you've heard me say many times in this chamber, were prepared on the basis of an acknowledgement that we have high car ownership, and we feel we have a case to require a higher provision than perhaps in the rest of Surrey. And we adopted those guidelines, and we've been very successful in enforcing them, particularly on appeal. So I think you can be happy that we are, as a matter of course, generally requiring over and above that, which perhaps the county would necessarily say was essential. If you think things are changing going forward, this is a policy matter, and it may well be in the future you want to have a look at your guidelines again and refresh the evidence and look at whether they are now up to date and meeting your expectations. But for now, the scheme is fully compliant, and it would be very difficult on the basis of what I said to resist it on on grounds of parking provision. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Gray, you want to come back?
Yes, if I could come back. I can't emanate Councillor Forazeski's frustration, but you do create frustration in me coming back and telling me that these are comply with the guidelines. We have guidelines which are just that. My concern is about this layout, this density of houses, this layout of terraces, where there are going to be aspects of this site where there isn't going to be enough room for cars to park on the road. And that's my point I'm making, that guidelines are one thing, but they have to be assessed sensibly, as I know officers are capable of, based on the layout that's being proposed. If I could make that point strongly. And I think that, yes, we should look at it, but I think that's a separate thing. We should have the right to say, at this layout, this density, this is what we're asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thoroughly read this report, and I came here with an open mind. I've in no way been whipped, as Councillor Hyman said, by my political party. I've listened to the debate and I've made my mind up accordingly. I've listened to the residents' complaints, I've listened to the whole event. And for him to insinuate that we have been whipped, unlike the Farnham Residents' Party, we are not whipped in this council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barham. Oh, there you are. Sorry.
I'm over here. A number of points. It's been a very interesting debate and listening to all sorts of different aspects. First of all, Councillor Follows with the local plan, and he basically berated many of us, in fact most of us in this chamber and in the main council, for voting for local plan part 1. Many of us spoke against it because we didn't like it, but nevertheless felt the inevitable was necessary and that SIL would be the benefit. But then he follows on by saying, but I'm not getting the benefit of the SIL. If we hadn't passed the local plan, then it would be even further away. I know it's not going to come for this one unless something different happens, but nevertheless, it would have been much later. With regard to Sang, members of the public won't realise, and perhaps you'd like to join us for some more of our committee meetings, talking about large developments. We hear about Mr. Sweetman and Sang all the time. I remember when Sang was first brought in, or at least I think it was when it was first brought in, and the council at the time were worried stiff that it would stop all our developments. Now everybody, of course, finds ways of creating the objections because of inadequate Sang or whatever. What I haven't heard, I've seen, but I'm sure it's somewhere in the report, is where is the area of the birds that we're trying to protect, which area of land we're protecting, and how much further away is it than this particular site and the Sang? What is the distance and the route that they would take to go and walk on the land which we're trying to stop them walk on, or at least encourage them not to walk on? Fourth thing, affordable housing cost, and again Councillor Follows was very strong on asking, well, what is the cost? My understanding is affordable housing cost, which presumably the rented housing will be under a housing association, and I think housing association rents are within 10% of all the other houses in that area of Arons Hill and anywhere else in the borough, of course, that are under either council control or indeed under housing association control. So we have an understanding of what those rents will be, and they will of course vary from house to house, size to size. And the final point I'd like to make is Councillor Lee said he didn't understand the house sizes, I think. Can I suggest that if you look, I think, I've lost the page now, I think it's page 93, it tells you exactly what the sizes of each of the houses that are proposed are, and they vary in sizes above the technical space standard. They are all ticked as being complying, some greater than others, but they're there. The information is there, and therefore that is correct. And like others, I can see no good reason. I understand all the arguments why it's not right or whatever, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, there is an inevitability that we will need to pass this application. Otherwise, it will go to appeal, and we will spend a lot of time, money, and perhaps control of our situation with regard to planning appeals by turning it down. And I never like, by the way, being threatened about planning appeals. I think we should make the decision that is right, and I believe overall the decision and the recommendation is correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Just a point of the 78 affordable units, 54 would be for affordable rent and 24 for shared ownership. Just a reminder. Yes, you're right there. Councillor Munner.
The point's been largely made. I take mild exception to suggestions that we're whipped. This is a strictly non-party political process, and if anyone ever tried to do it to me, they would not do it again.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just in answer to Councillor Byam's misunderstanding, possibly because my articulation wasn't as good as it should be, but I was fully acknowledging that the first part of the technical space standards in relation to proposed floor space, for the first time that I recollect, every one of those houses meets those standards, so I was very happy about that. What I am not sure about, because we don't have the appropriate dimensions given, are the bedroom sizes, because there are minimum standards for bedroom sizes as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, do you want to come?
Thank you. One of the benefits of being in opposition is that I can sit here and say that you guys are going to cost my ward £4 million and you should have brought Sill in quicker, and that's why. So it's quite good to be able to say that. I agree. Thank you, Peter. SANG has to mitigate its harm, and I don't believe that any of the other amenities around it are actually material to that question. The SANG has to mitigate the harm that it's actually causing, independent of anything else around it, is my understanding. So I think actually it's not doing that. There was a suggestion regarding the fast chargers. Is it possible that we can, again, in the absence of Councillor Ward, who would normally do so, is there any condition that we could put in to increase that, that capability across the site to make it more sustainable? I think that would be better. Looking at the space standards, I agree they are all above the technical space standards, and that's great. There was a comment made at Housing Overview and Scrutiny about there was no stigma of social housing in Waverley, and a group was convened to investigate that question, and it's still ongoing through its reports. But one of the things that, that was a question as part of that is that was there any visible or space or other differences between affordable, social and market housing that would make them overtly different just from looking at them from the front? And I would note that all of the affordable units, I'll just ask for clarity from everybody in the room, just make sure I'm reading this correctly, all of the equivalent market versus affordable units, the affordable units all do seem smaller for the same type of unit. So I think what we are doing here is creating affordable housing that will look different from the market housing, which is exactly what we don't really want.
The opposite.
And finally, just a question for Surrey Highways again. Do we look at, do Surrey Highways look at strategically the impact of multiple developments around the same area, and also while they're being built out? So a concern that was raised by many residents, not only in my ward but also in the neighbouring wards, is that there's the potential for Milford Golf Course to be developed at the same time, relatively similar geographic area, relatively similar impacts on roads. Oxford Ridge Site C, the potential Guildford part of this. Is this considered in concert by Surrey Highways at a strategic level at all that we should be aware of? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, government good practice requires us to look at the cumulative impact. That means committed development, so that's development that's got consent, but also, as the assessment's done here, they have to look at traffic flows 5 years into the future and growth, all the background traffic up using national traffic growth figures. So in terms of all the planned development coming forward in the local area, the system's called Tempro. It's the National Growth Database, and that includes planning data. So the wider growth of stuff that's in local plans and coming forward is included in that background growth, but also we add on to that stuff that's then got planning consent. So there is an element of double counting, actually. It's very difficult to separate the two out. So yeah, that's a requirement of planning practice guidance to do that.
Fine. Elizabeth, can I just come back to a point that Councillor Gray made? To add an informative reference consultation with the community and parish?
We can certainly add an informative on that basis if that's what the committee would like, to encourage the applicants to engage with the community in terms of, if permission is granted, the rolling out of the implementation of this permission in terms of detail.
I think it's essential.
Could the condition include noting the objections of Godalming Town Council and their views on the consultations that have preceded it, if that is an informative?
I think
my point is to the quality of consultation that has preceded it. Therefore, my confidence in the quality of consultation that might be guaranteed by informative would not be particularly high. That's all.
No, we're looking forward with the condition. Informative. But the condition 25, which was just mentioned on charging, we discussed it earlier, Elizabeth, and we were going to firm that condition up to ensure that fast charging was part of our standard conditions. Richard.
So this council hasn't adopted any standards yet in terms of electric vehicle charging. The county council has provided guidance for all authorities, essentially trying to future-proof developments by encouraging the use of fast charging. In this case, the applicants put forward that if they were to put fast charging for every single dwelling, the additional infrastructure, the cost effectively for the power network to facilitate that would be significant. And in the negotiations that we've had with the applicant, I've been very conscious of ensuring that I've maximised the amount of Section 106 for infrastructure improvements, particularly on the A3100 corridor that Councillor Martin. So I would say that if members are minded to tweak the condition to say in accordance with Surrey County Council guidance, then that's at your wish. I think my feeling is that we've maximised it as much as we can for this site, and I feel that we've prioritised the infrastructure improvements, particularly to deal with the problems that we've got, particularly on that corridor into town. That's my professional judgment on it.
The Western area last week, we asked Development Control to put the standard Surrey charging regime in as a standard, and I think Beth would acknowledge that already. Elizabeth?
So what I would say, Chairman, having heard Richard's advice, if the committee still feel you'd like to impose a more demanding condition, that can happen, but you may run the risk, given the case that the applicants put forward, that they may come back and contest that condition. They have a right of appeal against it. They'd need to justify that it wasn't reasonable, and you run the risk of that. But it's certainly within your gift if you do want to change it. And I think Rebecca drafted some wording to reflect that.
Councillor Gray, I think, wants to come straight in.
I may be misreading it, but when I read through the report, I mean, like Councillor Ward, I'm very keen on the electric charging points, but the impression I got was this was at least as good as the Surrey advised, if not marginally ahead of it. They were putting slightly more fast charge in general areas, and they had agreed to put some fast charging around on individual houses. I think what I would request is that the the planning department use their influence over this developer to try and maximise the fast charging points, recognising that if we take it too far, there's a considerable infrastructure cost. I think it was quoted at one of these meetings, £1 million. The step change was for a particular proposal we said with 100%. But recognising that we're putting 2 substations in here, right, specifically for this site, there may be an opportunity for us to increase the fast charging points. That's what I would request. I don't want to put in here Surrey's guidelines because I think they're marginally ahead, but perhaps officers can tell me whether I'm right or wrong.
Councillor,
if we could allow the officers to just respond to Councillor Gray first, other than I mean, I would support the standard SCC condition and increasing the provision myself.
Thank you, Chairman. So there's fast charging provided for the flats. We've got 13 fast charge units spread throughout the site, which could be used by visitors and obviously people within the site who want a quick charge. Where it's falling slightly short of Surrey's aspirations, and you know, they are. I think we're one of the only county councils to have sort of put out there that, if possible, we should, for the future, be looking at fast charge throughout. But so where we've got here, we've got the houses are they all trickle charge, Rebecca? Did we just? So 133 trickle charging units for the houses and 53 fast charging points to serve the houses. So it's a combination. And I think I felt when given that this is quite new and emerging, and we're still sort of grappling with the infrastructure requirements to deliver these standards, I thought that we'd maximised it, particularly if you're in a house with a trickle charge and you want a faster charge, that will be available throughout the site.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Yes, I'm in broad agreement with trying to maximise the number of charge points, and particularly the fast charge points. I agree with that, but I don't want to see Peter robbing Paul. I would hate to see the 517,000 corridor improvement, the 83-100, being sacrificed for more charge points. I would not support that, but if there's a way in which we could maximise it and go further without impacting on the existing infrastructure agreement, then I would be very satisfied.
Councillor Follows, or no.
Chairman, I mean, if we're going that direction, then I really do think that we have to have something done about the junction with the of Eashing Lane with the Milford bypass, have a roundabout there or something like that. But of course, there's going to be another 150, 200 odd homes coming forward from Guildford. Perhaps that can pay for something like that, and would need EIA, of course. But the reason I'm just asked if I can speak again, Chairman, is in respect of conditions. I noticed that eventually the lack of reasons for the conditions precedent had been picked up, and that's all been done. But have we issued the notice, if necessary, to the applicant, and have we got their written agreement to those? Because the law changed, I think it was August last year, and we have to get the developer's agreement. And obviously, if the reasons weren't in the officer report, we may have forgotten to get the agreement. So that's the first thing. Secondly, actually, two issues which I don't know whether we'll pick up in design or conditions, but chimneys, we're told a load of chimneys have gone. How many? And how many? What percentage of the chimneys that people hated still remain? Because this hasn't been answered. Garages, we've been told that some of the houses have garages and some of them don't, but we've got no idea how many. So I'd like to know how many garages. I'd like to know how many chimneys remain. But particularly, in respect to conditions, condition 1 of any consent is normally the standard time limit condition of 3 years. We don't seem to have one. Do we not need those anymore? We have at condition 40, one for the community building. We want details prior to construction of who's going to manage the building and the fabric and the occupation of it. And I'm just wondering whether we should have details long before and, you know, at this stage, quite frankly, we should have details of how that community building is going to be used, because, you know, it's very possible that if a suitable use isn't found or whatever, it's going to change to further housing, and we should consider what's actually being proposed at this time, rather than, you know, look at the changes coming in later on. We were asked about, and it's a particular concern, the emergency access and whether we should put a condition in. So that's why I'm asking here. I'm sorry about the length of time it's taking. The access, are we going to put in a condition in respect of the access? Would it be practicable? Can we stop people using it? Because I think one of the greatest fears, I know this shouldn't be consented anyway, because we don't have an appropriate assessment in legal terms. But if we're going to, when we need to have proper control of the traffic, how can we guarantee that a condition will ensure that that access onto Halfway Lane is not being used as a general rule? Or ever, in fact, other than for emergency services. Thanks.
Thank you. Condition 19, I think, is one you missed out on. If you look for it, it's the timing. Elizabeth, you want to come back, please?
Only, Chairman, that there were a lot of questions in there, delivered quite quickly, Councillor Hyman. I'm not sure we wrote them all down, so we'll endeavour to answer them, but perhaps you can repeat them one by one, and we'll try and answer them.
Standard time limit condition.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. If I can just pick up a few, and I'm sure there'll be some that I'll miss that we'll have to come back to. In terms of the time limit, that's expressly stated on the decision notice. So that's where that comes into play. It doesn't need to be separate of a subject planning condition. The emergency access, there is a recommended condition, additional condition, which is number 53. That's on the update sheet, so that will secure details for that. In terms of the community building and how it will be used, there's a recommended condition in relation to that, and off the top of my head I think it's number 40 something, but I will just check. Number 40. Now that allows for essentially engagement with the community to see and to establish the best use of that community building. So that allows some flexibility in its use. Obviously its use is proposed as Class D1. However, in terms of how it would specifically be used, that would follow after engagement with the community. So that condition will include details of that. In terms of the chimneys, I think it's on 20 of the dwellings that had chimneys. They have now been removed, and the remainder of the height of all of the chimneys have been reduced. I'm afraid I don't know how many specific units that is, but 20 dwellings have had them removed, and then the remainder would be reduced. There has been a parking strategy submitted. A number of the dwellings do have garages, but I'd ask for some time to just look at the plan to count those up if you wanted a specific number. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Forresky, you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to come back. Forgive me for going over something that's already been discussed, but I think the recent comments, the debate gives great strength to the need, as suggested by Councillor Gray and endorsed by yourself, Chairman, to an informative or a condition that brings together a multidisciplinary group that actually looks at a lot of the issues that can be ironed out. From my own experience, a lot of strategic applications in the past have come back with amendments or other suggestions on a wide variety of things, and these things can be ironed out at a different stage. I take on board what Councillor Follow says. I think it's a point well made. The consultation has to be good on this. It has to be inclusive, and it has to be something. We've got experience of this with I think it's Cranley Brick and Tiles. We've got a very successful liaison group, and it still continues to this day, where a lot of people are involved. So I would like to add my support to a condition of that nature, and I think condition 40 touches on it to a degree, but we can, if we see that being elaborated, it can encompass many of the things that's been discussed this evening. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back.
Thank you. I think we're done. Officers, do you wish to come back at all? Councillor Follows.
Are we able to put as part of that condition regarding consultation, are we able to give any guidance as to who the consultation owner or body is? So, for example, are we able to say give it to Godalming Town Council to be the consultation responsible party for running that consultation, as opposed to the developer or the applicant?
Sorry, Chairman.
Elizabeth, the informative then for consultation.
Yes, so I mean, it could be actually a condition rather than informative, and there could be a condition requiring details of a community engagement strategy, the details of which to be agreed, and therefore the constitution of that group to be agreed subsequently, and that will pick up on relevant stakeholder groups. That's actually similar to an arrangement that's been put in place for Brightwells in Farnham, where there's collaboration going on in order to engage the community in onward aspects of the proposal. So if the committee were minded to move from informative to a condition, that would be possible. If it's just an informative, it would just say that the applicant is advised to enter into discussions with the community and to engage in respect of future phases of the scheme and detail. It would be down to them to actually set up appropriate arrangements. It's inevitable that would involve the Town Council, I'm sure, as the leading body representing the town, but that's just my take on it. So, thank you.
To me, it seems the condition is the right way forward, but I think Councillor Gray wants a word.
I just wanted to propose that we move that to a condition. I mean, it's stronger. I wouldn't necessarily dictate the body. I think that's to be in consultation with the Town Council, but I think if we go back to the Cranley one, I think we were quite successful in steering them towards a better consultation than went beforehand. So I certainly support a condition and propose it if I need to.
I think we can take that as read. I certainly second that one, and Elizabeth's writing as we speak. Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I just wondered, just as a matter of process, have we got the, I think I asked whether we've got the applicant's agreement to the preconditions, whether we've had that in writing, because I think we do have to. We haven't seen anything on the website. I don't know whether it's normal. The answer is condition 53, thanks for pointing me to that. Sorry I hadn't seen that. What I'd say in respect to that is I don't understand how that access is only going to be used by emergency services. I know that you have posh bollards, electrical ones that go up and at the wrong time and wreck the underside of people's cars, and but that they work for some people and things like that. Should we have more certainty that this is actually practical? Because we can't put in a condition if it's not practical. We know that they have to be enforceable and practical, don't they? How is that emergency access? Because, you know, I'm very worried that this site is going to be dumping a lot of its traffic straight out onto a halfway lane. If there's any way you can get through that, it will do, rather than go the other way. And any estate agent will bring his guests along halfway lane instead of going through Aaron's Hill, won't they? Because that's what they do, anyone with sense. So can you tell me, have we got a way of doing this to ensure that this condition, or do we need to discuss it now and make sure we have a stronger condition? That's what I'm really asking. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman? Yep. What we would do, as we've done for other sites in Surrey, is it's a old-fashioned lockable big old bollard or gate, and the key is deposited with the local fire service, you know, and it goes in. But obviously there's new ideas coming up all the time, but so that detail would be submitted, but effectively it would be, you know, a physical barrier to stop people using it on a daily basis.
Thank you. Elizabeth, anything else before I move to the recommendation?
I don't think so, Chairman. I hope we've answered all the questions, but as I said, we hopefully written them all down, but I hope that...
Thank you. I move to recommendation A, members, that subject to the applicant entering into an appropriate legal agreement within 6 months of the date of the committee resolution to grant planning permission to secure the provision of contributions towards 30% affordable housing and affordable housing mix, education infrastructure, SUDS, management and maintenance, off-site GP capacity, public open space and play space provision and maintenance, public access, off-site highways improvements, travel plan, car club, leisure and green space areas, environmental enhancement, recycling facilities, Surrey Police recruitment and equipment, self-build plots and provision and maintenance of SANG, as identified in the appropriate assessment, subject to conditions 1 to 49, as set out on pages 129 to 148 of the agenda report, and the additional conditions 50 to 54, and the one we've just added, 55, on consultation. An amended condition 25 on electric charging to the Surrey County Council guidelines. Was that agreed or not? I'm not sure. No, it wasn't agreed. Sorry, we'll delete that one. So, conditions 50 to 54 are set out in the update sheet, plus 55 that we've talked about with community engagement. And informatives, permission be granted. Those in favour, please show. Those against?
2. That's it.
That's it. Complete. Recommendation B, that in the event the requirements of recommendation A are not met, permission be refused. Those in favour, please show.
That's unanimous.
And recommendation C.
So, Chairman, can I ask if you give the numbers, because the webcast won't hear that. People at home will have no idea what went on.
So it was unanimous.
But the previous 16 to?
16 to 2.
Thank you. I guess that. Thanks.
Additional recommendation C, that if the formal planning decision in respect of recommendation A is issued on the 1st of March 2019 or thereafter, then the head of planning be authorised to charge SIL in accordance with the Council's approved SIL charging schedule and revised Section 106 infrastructure payments. Those in favour of recommendation C, please show.
That is unanimous, 18.
Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, would you just record my vote against the recommendation A, or 1? Or
and mine, please, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Noted. That completes the meeting, members. Thank you all very much indeed.